Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Hunter Naruto Got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. They say an army marches on its stomach. Can the same not be said of Huntsmen and Huntresses? Powerful though they have been, mighty warriors they may well be, peerless engines of destruction against the grim they certainly, but even they need to eat. We all do. Young or old, the human body simply cannot last long without food and water. Teenagers certainly. No, everyone needs to eat. It's simply the way of life. Some are picky about their fare. Others will eat just about anything. A number prefer spicy food. More tend toward a more delicate palate. I've made an art of it these days. Sounds strange, doesn't it? When I first found myself stranded in this world, I was lost for a while. I fought for a time, discovered a few new tricks, kept moving. That sort of thing. Thought about opening a bakery for a bit. Decided against it. I tried different careers, learned a lot of hobbies, but in the end one really stuck with me. Cooking. To you, being a chef of Beacon might seem like something of an odd choice, especially for an ex-shinobi. For me it seemed a simple one. When you've saved the world half a dozen times over and stranded yourself in a foreign dimension, there really isn't anywhere else left to go. You've seen all there is to see, done all you can do, and at some point just don't feel like fighting anymore. It's not that you can't or won't, but that you simply choose not to. So you try to find a hobby, something that makes you happy, something that makes others happy too. Let somebody carry on the good fight. Let someone else be the hero. Let something happen. My home was at peace when I left it behind, probably still is. Even if it isn't, it's none of my concern. They probably don't even need me, and it's not like I can get back to them. I've had decades to reconcile myself to that fact. When I first landed here all those years ago when I first met Ospen, I had nothing. I didn't want to be a huntsman, wasn't interested in his crusade, but I helped him anyway. For a time. Gave him a lifetime or two to set up his precious schools. It paid off. Some might argue that I still have nothing to show for it. I disagree. There are so many recipes out there, so many different ways to prepare food, and I've had plenty of time to learn. I've spent most of my savings on cooking lessons and learning what it means to be a chef. There are mistakes, to be sure. Loads of them. Took me 100 years to get my craft right. Burned down a building or two, or 3, or 4, but I learned because I had the time. Uzumaki genes have their perks, I suppose. Or maybe it has something to do with Kurama and being a Jinchuriki. I don't look a day over 20. Eternal youth has its perks, I suppose. Never asked for it, but it lets me live life at my own pace. Oz still asks me about it now and again. Why Beacon? If only he knew. Well, let me put it this way. I tried my luck in Atlas for a time, even made something of a career there in the beginning, until a certain Schnee suffered a nasty bout of food poisoning, followed by an aneurysm, and a stroke. More fool he for insulting perfectly good cuisine. He got what was coming to him. After that, I decided it was high time to move on to greener pastures. Poor Jack. These days he's barely able to string together a single sentence, let alone walk. Death would have been kinder. How he survived, I'll never know. Doesn't matter, I suppose. He'll pass on sooner or later. If he takes too long, I'll just finish what he started. Winter was a good kid, though. Wonder what she's been up to. Last I heard, she was headed into the military. Now then, where was I? Oh, right, Mistral too humid. Lionheart reminds me of a twitchy rabbit. Nope, not having any of that. Vacuo is too hot. And too much sand. I hate sand. It gets everywhere. But Vale is just right. Feels like I've come full circle. Ospen doesn't need me to fight nowadays. I'm officially retired. Let the new someone start something, I'll gladly finish it, but I've not seen hide nor hair of trouble these days. Salem's been strangely quiet for the last few decades since I threatened her with Kurama. Suppose that means she's building up her forces again. Maybe, maybe not. Personally, I think she's scared. Either way, I'm content here. I'm just a chef now. My fighting days are done. Alright, then it's initiation day, let the hungry masses come. What could possibly go wrong? Weiss approached the cafeteria on a whim. It was the morning of initiation and quite frankly, she was ready to have it done. Anxiety had kept her up most of the night, left her tossing and turning in the auditorium while the rest slept soundly in their sleeping bags. What would the test be? A written exam and trial meant to display their physical prowess? Something else entirely. It nagged at her like an old wound, poisoning her every thought. Would they have to fight one of the teachers or worse, Grim by the brothers? She didn't know, and the lack of said knowledge was slowly but surely driving her stark raving mad. Stop it. She pinched an arm as she walked to quell her racing thoughts. You're a Schnee. You are better than this. She'd woken before the others as well as that noisy girl with the silver eyes in the vain hope of having time with her thoughts and a quick morning meal. She was beginning to regret that now. She was tired, grouchy, and frankly, she felt like stabbing someone with Mutanaster. But she couldn't show any of that to be public because she must be better. She had to be. She must be. Ever since father's poisoning, mother had been well, better frankly, but Willow Schnee wanted nothing to do with the company that caused her so much misery. And so the burden of running the SDC fell to her children. Winter had seen sense and run away to the military at the first. Weiss hadn't. More fool she. By the time she realized what she was getting into, it was too late. As such, more and more responsibility fell upon her shoulders, so much so that she'd come to Beacon just to be rid of it for a time. If it wasn't meetings with shareholders, it was marriage offers, not all of them male, or other sycophants seeking her favor. Weiss was so sick of it. Why did she ever want to be heiress again? Such a heavy burden it was. Sometimes, in her darker moments, she would wonder to just give the company to Whitley and be done with it. But not today. Lifting her chin, she approached the double doors and shouldered them aside. She mustn't falter here among her peers. Any sign of weakness here would be the death of her. She would be prim and proper, and maybe a bit of breakfast would set her to rights. She had heard tell that Beacon's chef was something of a prodigy. From one genius to another, she felt she'd be able to appreciate the fine cuisine he prepared if in fact the rumors were true. Or not. The opinion of the common folk was sometimes exaggerated after all. For all she knew, so-called chef might be nothing more than an amateur. Besides, she was feeling rather peckish this morning. Even a Schnee had to eat breakfast. If Weiss could do so in relative peace and quiet, all the better. Weiss stopped short, heels clicking ominously in the silence. Well, that had to be a semblance or the strangest birth of octuplets she'd ever seen. How else could there be nearly 9 of the same person manning the cafeteria? They were even dressed the same, all clad in orange and black with blue besides alike. They wore dark red aprons over darker jeans and orange turtlenecks as they scuttled about the kitchen. No, wait, there was a 9th behind the counter, humming softly to himself as he worked. Salutations. The one behind the counter, likely the leader of the bunch, grinned at her. Early riser, are we? When she nodded, his teeth flashed in a disarming grin. Good on you, what'll it be? The fresh aroma of breakfast reached Weiss as she approached and wrestled her suspicions away. Ice blue eyes flicked over the assembled foodstuffs, then back to him. He was a handsome enough fellow, if a little rough. Sharp golden eyes with strange pupils, whiskered cheeks, and a wild mane of spiky blonde hair. Some might have thought him a faunus, but no, she believed him to be a human. Even if he hadn't been, it wouldn't have changed anything. She wasn't father. One must judge an individual by their skills, never their race or face. What do you have? Whatever you like, he sang back. A brow quirked. Anything that's a bold claim. The young man grinned. What can I say? I never go back on my word. Ice blue eyes narrowed. In that case, I require waffles with fresh syrup and butter, a side of bacon and eggs, and a tall glass of orange juice. Perhaps that was a bit petty of her to ask for so much of him. For a wild moment, she actually considered apologizing. No, Schnee did not apologize unless absolutely necessary. But blast it all, she was grouchy, and he was just so damn peppy. How one minute could be awake and smiling at this ungodly hour was beyond her. It'll be ready in a minute. Here, he slid her a warm biscuit on a pale blue plate. Have this in the meantime. Weiss accepted with a modicum of thanks and nibbled at it with the dainty grace of her station. Her knees buckled and the world burned white as her body nearly collapsed. Bliss, while his voice yanked her out of the daze. How was it? The heiress blinked, suddenly realizing she was cradling naught but crumbs in her hands. The biscuit was gone. Her eyes widened and she glanced about in search of it, only to find empty air. Beacon's chef propped himself against the counter with a small smile of his own, so much so that she found herself somewhat taken aback. What was that? What happened? Ah, first-year syndrome, the young man tittered softly. Never get tired of that. Here, another tray slid across, bearing delightfully fluffy eggs and bacon. Eat slowly, now, he cautioned her. Small bites. Don't want to overwhelm you. Weiss willed herself not to snap at him and did as she was bade, taking tiny bites rather than simply inhale the meal before her. Her mouth tried to betray her and scarf it down, eager to consume the delicacy before her, but she refused to let her body have its sway. She controlled herself with crisp, clear movements, even as her eyes began to water. It was like taking a little bit of heaven. No pedestrian fare, this she had to know his name. And so she asked, Naruto Uzumaki, at your service. He sketched a quick bow. Say, you look familiar. The blonde squinted at her, vaguely reminding her of a curious fox she'd once seen in her youth. You wouldn't happen to have an older sister by any chance, would you? About ye-high? He raised a hand. She's got a really stiff posture. Last time I saw her she was around your height. He could only be describing one person. Weiss blinked. Do you mean Winter? She's my older sister. His eyes lit up. Really? Is she here? Weiss frowned. She is not. Oh. He seemed to deflate a little and shrink into himself, reminding her of a kicked puppy. Well, I suppose it was too much to hope she'd remember me. He looked away with a put-upon sigh. She was fairly busy at the time. Give her my regards when you see her, would you? Weiss regarded him anew. His words jogged a memory. Her sister had spoken glowingly of a young man who once prepared meals in her schoolyard days. A chatty young man with striking golden hair and whiskered cheeks. But she'd said his eyes were blue. Naruto's were gold. How odd that they had the same name. Really, what were the chances? You're staring. The heiress flinched, having been caught out. Is it the eyes? I use Zangetsu in my cooking. Tends to change their color a bit. See, the blonde blinked, and sure enough, those warm caramel eyes became a startling shade of blue and his pupils rounded out once more. There we go. How's that? Oh dear, it really was him. Winter was going to have an absolute fit if she stayed quiet about this. She began comprising that letter in her head. Surely nothing would come of it. You'd be surprised. Naruto prattled on, blissfully unaware of her inner turmoil. Chakra has a pretty distinct flavor to it. An idea seemed to occur to him then. Oh, don't worry. This isn't nearly enough to turn you into a frog. Weiss gagged. I'm kidding, he laughed as she clutched at her throat and leaned back with another dazzling smile. I perfected that bit ages ago. Here, another tray slid out. Have your waffles. They certainly looked good. Hard he really prepared them that quickly. Weiss took up her fork and knife and prepared a dainty bite, trying to steel herself against what she knew was coming. She failed. Her eyes bulged, and not from disgust. The waffles were buttery soft and melted in her mouth, sending her tongue twitching in delight. A rather questionable noise fled from her mouth, and she was suddenly and intensely glad no one save the chef was present to witness this. What is this? Waffles. His smile was telling and told her he knew exactly what he'd done. Just like you asked. Waffles, these were heavenly. Divine. Too late she realized she'd eaten them in her haste, and though she was now full, her eyes watered for not having more. Naruto offered her the orange juice she requested. It proved to be the sweetest of nectar. It left her feeling energized, awake in a way she hadn't been in years. All the stress and fatigue she'd found herself grappling with melted away just like the food she'd eaten. Her mind whirled, struggling with this sudden surge of energy. Feeling a bit more awake now, are we? Her head bobbed, sending her hair swaying. I am refreshed. Even what did you put in that? Naruto spread his arms. Chakra. What else? You'd be amazed what you can make with it. Hardly any calories, either. Her eyes sparkled at the implications. If he could make breakfast taste this good, then what could he do with other meals just like that? Her mind slipped its leash, got away from her, and ran for the hills. She could see it now. If breakfast made her feel this good. Her gaze fixed on him. How much would it cost to hire you as my personal chef? Nope. Naruto shook his head. Not interested. She frowned. I am prepared to offer you a rather significant sum. Sorry. Merry blue eyes twinkled back at her. I wouldn't do it for all the lien in the world. I'm quite happy where I am. Drat. Good luck, rookie. For a moment it looked like he'd pat her on the head, but he saw her scowl and seemed to think better for it. Quick as a flash he went back to his task. I'll see you later if you make it into Beacon. Her pride bridled at the perceived slight. What kind of attitude is that? Of course I will. He shrugged. If you say so. I do say so. I'm sure you do. His head bobbed in agreement as he began to prepare another meal. Plenty of people try to get into Beacon. Some succeed. Others fail. And you. He waved a hand, flailing it a bit. You've clearly got a chip on your shoulder. I'd get rid of that, were I you. It won't do you any good here. You'll have to work hard. How dare he? Weiss felt a spark of anger ignited in her cold heart. Good food or not, Naruto's attitude clearly left much to be desired. She had chosen to come here, willingly picked Beacon over every other school. Of course she was prepared to work hard. Who was he to say whether she was worthy or not? Huffing, she raised her chin and turned away. Thank you for the meal, but you know nothing about me. Nope. The blonde beamed back. But I know your type. Mark my words, you really ought to let that pride go. Oh, that was it. She rounded on him and stabbed a finger into his chest. You wouldn't know pride if it slapped you in the face. Oh, Naruto leaned forward, eyes flashing like twin gems. Let's make a little wager then. Aha, her walls slammed down. So that's what he's after. I'm no gambler, sir. You'll get no lien from me. Nah, he dispelled her fears with a wave of the hand. Ain't interested in money. I've got heaps saved from my younger days. Younger days? He didn't look a day over 20, tell you what. He snapped his fingers and pointed one at her. If you make it into Beacon, I'll deliver a meal of your choosing to your room every day. I'll even teach you how to cook, since you seem to have an eye for good food. Weiss perked up. His skills were certainly top-notch. And yet, what happens if, by some miracle, I fail? Nothing. The bead of sweat ran down her brow. You're mocking me, aren't you? No, no, no. The chef held up his hands. There's no penalty. Think of it as encouragement. Of course, if you're not satisfied with that, we could always raise the stakes. Her stomach whimpered at the idea, reminding her of the meal she'd just consumed. I'm listening. Naruto held up 3 fingers. Make it as team leader and I'll be your personal chef for your entire tenure at Beacon. No questions asked. Her heart soared. You're on. But if you don't, you have to worth eyes. He dipped down behind the counter and whipped out a hideously orange apron with black letters stitched across its surface. Kiss the cook it read. Weiss felt her eyes begin to burn at the sight of it. Too bright, much too bright. She had to wear that. No. No, no, no. Absolutely not. She'd sooner die. What's wrong? Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a smile. I'm sure your sister wouldn't have balked at a wager like this. Weiss made a keening noise through her teeth. I'll have you know I'm 10 times the huntress she is. His smile told her that was a mistake. Then you'll have no trouble meeting our little wager. Why you? The chime overhead silenced her before he could counter her. Oh, that's the bell. Naruto looked up. Better get ready. They'll call you to the cliffs soon. Weiss blinked. Cliffs. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Naruto shrugged. I really shouldn't be telling you this, but Osman's a quirky bastard. He raised a hand and beckoned her closer. Against her better judgment, Weiss found herself leaning in. You're going to be launched into the Emerald Forest to collect relics and fight Grim. Even as she digested that, he bowled on. Pretty sure it'll be chess pieces this year. Oz was always fond of those. Her lips parted to inquire about that, but his words rode her down for yet a second time. Oh, and the first person you make eye contact with will be your partner for the next 4 years, so be careful. Her heart sank into her stomach. Thank you. Is there anything else? Will all first-year students please report to the cliffs for initiation? A familiar voice intoned from the speakers. I repeat, please report to the cliffs for initiation. Don't mention it. He winked. Good luck, oh, and make sure you have a good landing strategy. Weiss muttered a half-hearted farewell and scampered off with rosy cheeks. Inwardly, her mind began to race. Make it into Beacon, easily done. Lead her own team, nothing simpler. She simply needed to prove herself a good leader. She could do that. No, she would do that. She'd make that man eat his words. He'd be waiting on her hand and foot. She swore to write that letter to Winter. Besides, he clearly knew her. Perhaps her sister could apply pressure where she could not. Not for sale, was he? Well, they'd just see about that now, wouldn't they? This wasn't over. He would be hers one way or another. How little she knew. A chef is king in his kitchen. There is no one higher than he. In this moment, true words had never been spoken. Today, the cafeteria of Beacon girded itself for war. All right, people gather round. Naruto stood stop a chair, his voice booming through the empty room as he faced the horde below him. You know what day it is? He crossed both arms before his chest. Keen blue eyes stared his soldiers down. We've got hungry mouths incoming this morning, and more than a few of them. Do we have all the ingredients we need? More than 24 voices answered him in flawless salute. Yes, sir. A blonde brow quirked. I'm sorry, what was that? He set a hand to the side of his head. I can't hear you. Aye. That's better. Now, as I'm sure you all know by now, a crooked grin plucked at his whiskered visage. We're facing the start of a new year. With that said, he hopped off the chair and began to pace before the ranks of his clones. We're going to have some fresh faces here, and more than usual at that. You know how hunters and huntresses are. They're picky. Can't be as bad as Winter. Blue eyes narrowed. Which one of you cheeky pricks said that? His brothers rounded on the traitor, fingers pointing. He did it, definitely him. I mean, I'm not wrong. The suspect shrugged. Remember how choose he was when it came to eating her veggies. A muscle jumped in his jaw. To the latrines with you. Wait, why me? Two of the cloves carried the dissident off in short order. Naruto scowled after them and shook his head. Why the fuss about Winter? He'd only cooked her meals when she was little, taught her a few things here and there, that sort of thing, until he'd poisoned Jack. Then he had run like the wind. Hardly the best impression. She probably didn't even remember his name. Shelving a strange bout of nostalgia, he left the rest to their handiwork. Blue eyes shimmered with flecks of gold as he darted through the galley, the better by which to sense the chakra at work in the air. Earth, fire, wind, and water, he and his brothers were masters of their craft. They worked with an ease born from countless years of practice, an art form honed out of experience and determination alike. Of one mind and one body, they sallied forth to face the horde with the grit of true warriors. This was a dance they'd done before, though the steps might change, the tune remained the same. This was their battlefield, this was their war. No greater purpose than this could there be. On a whim, the immortal created another trio of clones and tasked them with setting the tables. Make sure we have enough fruit ready, he called to one of them. The doppelganger saluted. On it, boss. And you've finished the muffins? Yes, boss. He grinned. Go easy on the butter for the pancakes. Sure thing, boss. Today was the first day after initiation, and with its passing he found himself not exactly pressed per se. A man who could create an army at a whim was seldom pressed, but still somewhat harried nonetheless. Initiation was always interesting its own way, but it was what came after that truly intrigued him. For if initiation was a storm for Beacon, then the dreaded day after was a hurricane. He'd seen many a student pass through these hallowed halls already. It was always a nice thing to meet new people, guessing at their eating habits, though well, that took some learning. Speaking of new, he pivoted on one heel as a thought occurred to him. Where's the lamb sauce? Coming right up, boss, a clone chirped. We're just finishing it now. Wait, another frowned. This is breakfast. Who's gonna want? Blue eyes narrowed on the dissident. Hop to it. Yes, sir. In his time as chef of Beacon, he'd discovered 3 fundamental truths. 1. Huntsmen and Huntresses needed more than good food, just as they needed more than mere calories. They needed energy. Calories, carbs, you name it. They burned right through them like no one else in the world of Remnant, which in turn meant they were often hungry. Now, when a huntress wants to join the military, even more complicated. By that logic alone, Winter had been a right devil to cook for when she was little. Sassy, perhaps, but rewarding. To everyone had different tastes. Take Team CFVY for instance. Coco needed extra sugar in her morning coffee. Said coffee was delivered to her room by a shadow clone. He'd already sent one up 5 minutes ago. She wouldn't even get out of bed without the scent of his homemade brew, and as he'd soon learned, if Coco Adele didn't get up, Velvet and the rest certainly wouldn't. Throw in a heaping helping of oatmeal and she'd be down shortly. Yet Sohashi was less a picky eater, but he had to have his tea made just right or he wouldn't touch the stuff. Likewise, Fox requested pure water imported from an oasis in Vacuo near Shade Academy. Pricey, but he had friends in high places. Sweet little Velvet loved her muffins and sausages with a side of bacon. Girl liked her greasy foods. You'd never know it by looking at someone like her. But he digressed. Third, never show fear. Fear was the enemy. If it was his job to keep these runts fed for the duration of the next 4 years, he would do so both physically and mentally. These kids would head out into the real world someday, face grim in all their ugly glory. Life may be beautiful, but Remnant was a cruel place. If he could impart a nugget of wisdom here and there while this lot enjoyed their meals, maybe prepare them just a little bit to face the hardships ahead, would consider his a job well done indeed. A distant chime caught his attention. Right then, they'll be here soon. Rubbing his hands together, he moved to another line of clones and began to prepare a meal of his own. I've still got time for this, then. Within moments, the fresh sizzle of meat filled the air, laced with by decadent spices. At a glance it might seem strange to make steak for breakfast, but as he learned, Beacon catered to all kinds. More than a few of the later years had some energy-intensive semblances. Beacon catered to all kinds, faunus and human alike. He knew at least 3 students who needed copious amounts of protein just to function. Best have extra on hand just in case. Forewarned was forearmed after all. Saffron orbs flashed as he made his final preparations, and then, meal prepared, he passed it off to another clone. A quick spark of flame from his palm sprang through the air to feed the faltering fire from a nearby stove. Then he was away, mind already a whirl to the next task at hand. No doubt he'd have to learn the newfound tastes of these sassy greenhorns and adapt to that as well. He hadn't seen many picky eaters thus far, but life had a way of throwing curveballs at him where freshmen were concerned. Good. He liked a challenge. Still, small part of him couldn't help but wonder if a certain Schnee had passed her initiation. Full of fire, that one. Not unlike another team he knew. His faith was rewarded a moment later as the doors crashed open with a thunderous crack. Ahoy, Whiskers, a familiar voice crowed. I've come to bargain. He turned and quirked a brow at them. You've come to eat, more like. Morning, Coco. Beacon's resident gunner flicked her shades down as she walked, dark eyes dancing beneath. One of these days, you'll fall for it, muff. Her words were subsequently muffled by a flung bagel. Like an arrow it flew straight and true. Coco never stood a chance. The missile struck her mouth in mid-sentence, snapping her head back to land perfectly between her teeth. Her diatribe never got off the ground. Her mouth closed with an audible click, brown eyes gone wide. Really, that never got old. Turns out you could throw food just as hard as a knife. Who knew? She should have learned by now. Naruto lowered his arm. The day I do that is the day I go to you for fashion advice. MRMHMPH, I mean, come on. She took a hasty bite and swallowed. You'd slay in a good pair of jeans. A slightly glazed look came over her eyes. Not to mention a tight, down, Coco. Velvet swatted her arm as she stepped past. That's my big brother you're looting. Not by blood, good lord. You could grind me on through. As she wilted but a little when Yatsuhashi whacked the back of her head. Fine. Her hands rubbed the back of her beret and she subsided with a whine. Can't a girl have her fantasies? The pair exchanged a wry look. No. Spoil sports. Anybody else want to rain on my parade? Fox raised a hand, only to subside under their leader's withering glare. Not you, too. Naruto left the 3 of them to it and turned a bemused look upon Beacon's resident bunny. Well, he cocked an eyebrow, arms spread wide. Where's my humph? Breath burst from his lungs as her head collided with his chest. Not a moment later her slim arms circled around his waist in a mighty squeeze. Say what you would about Velvet, but when she hit hard. Hell, she could absolutely throw down with the best of them when pressed. Her hugs were something to be feared, least of all when she hadn't seen you for a month. She made that abundantly clear now. I missed you so much. Heh. A familiar surge of warmth tugged at Naruto's chest. That a girl. Missed you too. So he laughed and patted her head. How was your summer vacation? Good. Velvet drew back half a pace and swayed in place, knees twisting in thinly veiled delight. Really good. Coco and me visited my da in Atlas. And it was cold up there. Coco cackled from the back. At least you had someone to keep you warm. Velvet flushed to the roots of her hair. Coco, not sorry. Naruto quirked another brow at her. Velvet and Coco, well, now, that was new. He'd been busy this year, so much so that he hadn't kept tabs on anyone for once. It was always so boring around these parts when Beacon let out for break. Initiation and the week thereafter often proved hectic, but it was a burden he'd long since learned to live with. After all, with classes back in session it meant said boredom would very much be a thing of the past. There would be meals to prepare, students to see, and fights to break up. Never a dull moment. Honestly, times like these made him glad he'd turned down Osman's offer to be a teacher. Maybe in another life. No, that was a thought for another time. Oh, shaking it off, flicked a glance to the box at Velvet's belt. Did your old man help you tune up Anasadura? Yup. She patted her camera with pride. Got plenty of material up there, too. That's so. He cocked a brow at his foster sibling. Anything good? A few things. Her smile proved predatory. You're not going to tell me, are you? Nope. She smacked her lips. He laughed as she slipped away. Cheeky girl. When you cease to age in the effective sense of the word, it was all too easy to lose touch with reality. He'd learned to counter that by throwing himself wholeheartedly into his profession. Here, it was easy to see everyone as one big family. No, perhaps that wasn't the right word. Strange as that might sound, Beacon was his family. Not children per se, but brothers and sisters all. He'd fed and occasionally taught hungry masses here for decades now. After a few years it was difficult to think of anything but blood, even if they weren't related. Which reminded him, any word on the new bloods? They were just starting to wake up when we left. Yatsu rumbled as he sipped at his tea. I dare say they'll be down here any food. A cascade of crimson petals swept past them, bringing with it a mighty wind. Moment now. He finished with a sigh. Naruto couldn't help but smile. There she is. I suppose congratulations are in order. Schnee trudged in after the hurricane of flowers, looking like she'd bitten into the mother of all lemons. Poor thing. Really, a wet kitten looked more dangerous than her. The moment she laid eyes on him, however, her entire demeanor changed. She wiped her disdain away, stiffened and held her head high, chin lifted in silent challenge. He didn't miss the uniform. Well, color him impressed. Seemed she knew how to fight after all. Well, she huffed at him. Do you have something to say? Feisty as ever. Naruto laughed and sketched a bow. Welcome to Beacon, Princess. Princess. Weiss nearly hissed like a scalded cat when she first heard that nickname. It was only an ironclad sense of self-control that kept her from whipping Mitenester at Beacon's head chef. That and his damnable smile, a smile that told her he was waiting for just such an explosion. While there were worse things to be called, she supposed. At least he hadn't called her Snow Angel, unlike another blonde who shall not be named. There would be blood if anyone else tried that. Would you rather I not call you that? Naruto remained entirely at his ease, idly watching her teammates trailed into the cafeteria. I didn't intend to offend. The gleam in his eyes said otherwise. He was enjoying this well, two could play at this game. He know. She schooled her face into a smile that felt just a little too plastic for her liking. It's fine. You needn't concern herself. Who, boy? Coco whistled. You could cut that tension with a knife. I'm guessing you two know each other. Something like that. The whiskered warrior snapped his fingers and a fresh pair of clones swept up, a tray in each hand. We're acquaintances. Nothing more. Now shoo, Coco. He nudged the second year away. You've had your fun and I have work to do. Unless you want to lose your coffee privileges. The brunette hissed and dragged her team to another table. Weiss wondered if that was intentional. Look, this is really nice and all, but food now please, I'm starving. And then Ruby ruined the moment by walking right up to Naruto and tugging on his sleeve. The Bemused blue orbs met shimmering silver, widened but a little, then narrowed thrice as fast. Just a moment. Naruto didn't move, nor did he flicker or even blur at that. Even to Weiss' keen gaze he simply ceased to exist. One moment he stood before them, the next he shot behind the counter in a golden flash. A brief clatter of noise reached their ears and reappeared with a tray of piping hot cookies balanced on one hand. Cookies of all things. Ruby's eyes lit up. Do I never get to have these in the morning? You do today. He paused and squinted down at her, seeing something he hadn't before. Silver eyes. You look familiar too, say. Your last name wouldn't happen to be Rose by any chance, would it? Their resident reaper offered an innocent blink as she savored her early morning treat. Yes, for the first time since she'd seen him, Weiss watched Naruto recoil in surprise. It was a rare moment indeed, and she felt as if she were intruding for it. Not so Naruto. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, some specter of his past come back to haunt him from the grave. Summer. He whispered the name with something akin to reverence. Summer's your mother, isn't she? Ruby jolted. You know Mom. No, her. Naruto all but sputtered. I saved her from. He cut himself off with a harsh cough that turned his whiskered visage red. Well, that's a story for another time. He turned aside, muttering ruefully as a startled Ruby and Yang looked on. Good Lord, Summer had a kid. His eyes lingered on Yang, now happily chatting with a clone at the counter. Raven too, by the look of her. I'll be damned. Why didn't anyone tell me about that thrice as quickly? His gaze swept to the third member of their party. But where are my manners? I'm guessing your friend over there would prefer some food herself rather than listen to me flap my gums all day. Golden eyes turned upon him, framed by a rueful smile. I wouldn't say no to tuna. You'll have it. Weiss flinched aside, gripping her wrist. Naruto saw it and turned away, only for Ruby to grab at his wrist. She looked down and kicked one foot against the back of her heel. Did you? She hiccuped but a little, then mastered herself and looked up. Do you really save my mother? She's still alive, isn't she? At her fragile nod, he breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. Haven't seen her in years. He tapped a hand to one side of his head. We, didn't really part on the best of terms. There was a look there that spoke of something tender, something almost paternal, but she didn't dare guess at it. I wasn't able to save her left eye, but I'm glad she's doing all right. Thank you. His words turned into a stuttering mess as Ruby reversed her grip to bury her head against his chest. She rocked back and forth like a top, fingers fisting fiercely against his apron. Wait, was she? Her ears strained as a faint sniffle reached her over the din of her fellow students. She was. Thank you. Her leader all but wailed the words, balling into his shirt. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're welcome. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Naruto found no escape. His gaze settled upon Weiss. She backed away, shaking her head with such force that she nearly slapped herself with her ponytail. A quick glance confirmed that Blake had already been given her meal by a passing clone and left them to their fate. Fickle creature she was. In the end, he settled for a weak sigh and squeezed Ruby back. For all his fire, it seemed even he had his weaknesses. Crying girls appeared to be his kryptonite. Good to know. You don't understand. Ruby plucked her courage and looked up once more, eyes gone red and puffy. Mom always talked about someone on her last mission, but she never gave me any names. Her brow furrowed a little, and as Weiss looked on, she seemed to grapple with some distant memory. She kept saying she'd tell me someday or when you're older, but she never did. It really is you, isn't it? Naruto made startled Naruto noises. Weiss bridled. No, that was absurd. He didn't look a day over 20. Surely he couldn't be Ruby's fa. A distant crash claimed their attention. What's in this thing? Weiss slapped a hand to her forehead. Leave it to Yang to make a commotion. And just when it was getting good, two crazy fools, the lot of them. Her entire team was mad. In all honesty, she was only just beginning to realize this terrible truth. Ruby was an absolute spaz monkey, apparently prone to fits of weeping. Blake had barely spoken 2 words until now, and Yang. Oh dear. Oh my god, sure enough, she found blonde brawler all but writhing on the floor, clutching at a crepe she'd swiped from God's nowhere. This is delicious. Her next words were all of a moan, to which she latched out with her right arm and grabbed him by the collar. Marry me. No pass. He raised his arms to fend her off with a rueful smile. Sorry, no can do. Weiss felt her scarred eye twitch. Xiao Long put my cook down. It was the wrong thing to say. Yang pivoted. Your cook. Blasted, that came out wrong. I mean, that is to say. Heh. The blonde thumbed her nose. Just kidding, Weiss cream. Brothers above, she'd forgotten about the puns. Why had she come here again? No, that was a pointless question now. She already knew the answer. For all its quirks, this place put Atlas Academy to shame. That had never been in doubt. She'd taken one look: their bland uniforms, their rigid adherence to every rule under the sun, the cold cruelty of their lessons, and decided it wasn't for her. General Ironwood certainly meant well in all that he did, but her name was known there. Too much so. Her responsibilities stifled her enough, but she would have been surely smothered in those pale halls. By that alone, Beacon already stood head and shoulders above anything Atlas could offer. Her name might still be known here, but at least they wouldn't treat like bona fide royalty. If a bit of madness was the price she had to pay for some semblance of safety, then so be it. Although, Ruby Rose, get off that table immediately and put that pie down at once. Owa, her partner, whined, but I wanted to start a food fight. Young perked up. All right, go sis. It is entirely too early to be doing that. Naruto chortled softly to himself. So she says. Weiss rounded on him for it. And what's so funny? Nothing. He wiped a mirthful tear from the corner of his eye. Just reminded of happier times. Straightforward as ever, it seemed. Well, in any case, I'll say it again. Welcome to Beacon. He actually had the nerve to wink at her this time. At her for keeps, this time. Whirling back to the kitchen, he spread his arms wide. What'll it be? I'll make you anything you like. Within reason, of course. That was right, she remembered now, the wager. I won the bet. Some small petty part of her latched onto his words. He has to bring me meals, ha. But wasn't there another bit? Weiss felt like she was forgetting something. It probably wasn't too important. If it was, surely she'd remember. But now Yang was approaching him. Again. Oh, Naruto quirked a brow. You're approaching me. Yang's grin rivaled the sun itself. I can't eat more of your delicious food if I don't get closer. Then come as close as you like. Weiss rolled her eyes at her teammate. Both of you stop acting like that, or I swear I'll smite you. Naruto only laughed and posed harder. WRRRYYYY. It was too much. Weiss flung up her arms. Why the brothers, you can be such a child. Oops, that was the wrong thing to say. She knew at the moment, she said. Naruto quirked a brow. Yang grinned, looking like the cat who caught the canary and its whole family besides. She reached around and plucked up a fresh tray of hash browns with a rash of bacon besides. The Schnee skittered back. No, they wouldn't. Surely not. No. Naruto flicked the back of her forehead. Don't go throwing my food around just yet. Go sit with your sister. Oh, come on. Yang tossed her hair to one side. I'm just having a bit of fun. Xiao Long. Has your orbs narrowed? Get. Yang got. In all seriousness, a deal's a deal. Naruto laid one arm on the counter and set his chin against it. I'll make whatever you like. Weiss felt herself flinch but a little at that. If he noticed her unease, he did little to show any sign of it. Indeed, he pretended not to notice her anxiety entirely. What time would you like me to come up to your room? Weiss choked on her spit. Right, the bet. Definitely not anything untoward here. Nay, certainly not. Her pale face flushed. Across the room, Coco whistled between two fingers. Go, Greenhorn, claim your prize. A few accompanying hoots and whistles arose to meet her cry. Naruto launched a plate of pancakes at the cheeky gunner for her quip. A familiar ginger-haired girl dove into harm's way and snatched them with a triumphant cry of mine before landing among her teammates. Whenever you think is suitable. Wisely, she steered the conversation to safer waters. I made a call to my sister last night, by the way. The Naruto didn't seem fazed by the words. How's she doing? She's still healthy. You could say that. The less said about that, the better. In the end, her mind betrayed her, treacherous thing that it was. She'd never seen Winter fall out of her chair like that before. It had proven something of a memorable sight. In the end, her elder sister only said 3 words before closing the call. Keep him there, whatever that meant. She would do her best, of course, but it seemed an odd request regardless. It wasn't as if she'd rush all the way here from Atlas. Winter was the sensible sister, not one prone to flights of fancy or such. Surely nothing would come of that. Which reminds me, his words snapped her back to reality. Did you make team leader, by any chance? Weiss stilled as a pit opened in her stomach. Oh dear, she remembered now. They'd made another bet, hadn't they? They had a slow hair crept up the back of her neck, suffusing her pale skin with warmth. No, as much as she might wish it otherwise, she was most assuredly not the leader of Team RWBY. That honor fell to their dubiously named leader. She could lie to Naruto, of course she knew she could. She might even get away with it for a day or two until he asked a member of the faculty. Then she'd look the fool. Truth it was. She wilted. No. His eyes lit up. Apron of shame it is. Weiss made a keening noise between her teeth. Nuo. Quick as can be, he darted behind the counter and emerged with that hideous orange cloth. It was just as she remembered. Kiss the cook, indeed, she would do no such thing. He held it out to her and she swiped at it with a hand, trying to claw it away before anyone could see. She only succeeded in drawing undue attention to herself. I'm not wearing that. Is that an apron? Yang absolutely howled with laughter. How it is. Really? Now Naruto leaned back, considering as one might a squalling kitten. Does a Schnee not honor their word? Ruby giggled. Blake made a noise behind her. It might have been a laugh. Traitors, the lot of them, there would be a reckoning for this. Why, you fine Weiss all but ripped it from his hands. Give me that, you owe me a lesson besides. Right you are. His eyes flashed anew and she couldn't help but wonder if he'd been after that all along. How silly of me to forget. We've got another hour before lessons. Wait, they did? Why had no one told her about that? What trickery was this? But he was already smiling, taking her by the shoulder and guiding her aside. Put on that apron, he beamed as she did. Great, come on back and I'll teach you how to make one of my favorite dishes. A distant crash shattered his smile like so much brittle glass. Ha, see, guys, a rough voice exulted loudly. I told you her ears were real. Weiss felt Naruto's hand tighten on her shoulder for the merest of moments. That was the only warning she received. It seems we'll have to wait a moment. He pivoted in place, already moving away from her. There's always one in every year, I swear. Weiss rounded in turn, following his sudden retreat with a wary gaze. Didn't take much to see why. Someone was pulling on Velvet's ears. Yanking, really. A pained whimper pierced the silence, broken only by the laughter of four boys, a quartet she was somewhat ashamed to recognize. Team CRDL, of course it would be them. Aw, shit, she heard someone whisper. He pressed the velvet button. Damn straight, another muttered, commiserating with their. Shouldn't have done that. Right, then, she heard Naruto call across the room. You have 3 seconds to cut that shit out. What? Carden bridled, puffing out his chest. What's it matter to you, old man? She's just a stupid rabbit. Oh, the temperature didn't merely drop. It plummeted. That was the only warning Carden received. An almighty crack echoed through the cafeteria, bringing silence with it. Weiss didn't see the chef move, but Ruby must have, because she heard their leader gasp a moment before all hell broke loose. Velvet vanished with a squeak. One moment the faunus girl was struggling under Carden's ironclad grip, and the next she landed right in a grinning Coco's lap. Winchester slammed into the table, his head snapping to the right. A rabbit, is she? The chef of Beacon lowered his arm, rising to his full towering height as he did. By that very definition you're just a man. His nose wrinkled in thinly veiled distaste. And a bully at that. And you're just a damn cook, said boy burst to his feet. What do you care? Weiss gulped, and she wasn't even the recipient of his glare. Carden wilted beneath it, and his team with it. Light steps carried Naruto forward. Close, closer, closest, now. Just because I've laid down my shuriken and kunai for the time being, doesn't mean I've forgotten how to fight, son. I simply choose not to. But you, he snapped his fingers and 4 clones summarily appeared at his sides. You are unworthy of this food. They ripped their trays away, taking the food with it, much to the boy's displeasure. You bring dishonor into these hallowed halls. A snarl tore out of him, too deep to possibly be human. Get out, before I have Kurama throw you out. Actually, on second thought. A giant golden hand swatted Carden Winchester into the floor. Once, twice, thrice. Upon the fourth, that massive palm snatched him up and flung him clear into a wall. He slumped there like a broken doll. Puny huntsman. Coco laughed and elbowed Weiss. Yup, saw that coming. Should have seen what he did to the last bully. Velvet's practically a little sister to him. Weiss palmed her face. At least Winter wouldn't seen her like this. She could take some small pride in anonymity and hope this would all blow over. You really shouldn't tempt fate like that. Twin doors parted with a thunderous crash. I knew it was you. Winchester was only just stumbling to his feet when they caught him and sent him sprawling to the floor. He slammed into the rest of his team, still frozen by fear, scattering the lot of them like bowling pins. It was an apt comparison, Weiss thought. But only for a moment. Her attention was immediately riveted by the woman standing in the archway, arms still a phalange wide. Winter. Naruto looked up from the 5-course meal he'd already gone back to. Me, oh hey, Winter, long time no see. Well, Weiss had never seen her sister falter in such a manner, let alone act like a blushing schoolgirl. Yes, well, she tore her gaze away and gripped at her wrist. It's good to see you, too. Weiss looked left. Weiss looked right. Weiss flung up her arms. First time for everything, she supposed. Will this madness never end? She'd finally found him. Finally, after searching for so long, he stood before her. In hindsight, Winder couldn't believe her luck. Really, it seemed almost too good to be true. What were the chances that Naruto would leave Atlas and go Vale 1 and 4 were 1 to count menagerie? Slim perhaps, but quite possible for him. That he would then go to Beacon, also possible. The very same school her little sister chose to attend, unlikely, yet stranger things had been known to happen. But then for her own blood to blunder into him, no less, followed by a phone call no once was coincidence, twice an accident, thrice a pattern. What did 5 times make? This was meant to be, she just knew it. She wanted to jump for joy, throw her head back and shout to the heavens. She would have too, if there weren't so many prying eyes and students watching her just now. Even now, a tiny part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind and leap on him. No look-alike, here it was him. She recognized him, and he, here. From the way her squinted at her now, right down to those whiskered cheeks. He even had that same silly apron of his. The same one he'd worn when she had been but a girl. Weiss deserved a reward for informing her of this, but later. Prize now. Chin up, soldier, she rallied herself with a snarl. He's here, move. Crisp footsteps carried her forward, her boots clicking against the cafeteria floor. Chin up, spine straight, arms clapped behind her back. On the outside she looked every bit the specialist she was cold as her namesake, a warrior without peer, a Shnee who feared nothing. Not a thing inwardly, however. Hey, Winter. Naruto saw her and offered a jaunty wave. Long time no see, you look good. Not so much. You look good. Winter's overactive imagination took those innocent words and ran with them all the way to the end zone. Touchdown, goal, good, he'd said. How good? Just good. In what way did he find her attractive? Her heart leaped into her throat and a silly little giggle escaped her before she could clamp down on it. She never giggled. Oh, this boded poorly. If her self-control was already this shot no resist, she tried to be angry. She really did. How dare he have the gall to just say hello as if they'd only seen one another yesterday? The nerve blast. She couldn't do it. For all she knew, Naruto had gone straight to Vale from Atlas and not budged since. It sounded like something he would do. He'd never been the sort to travel over much in the past. Yes, well, she tore her gaze away and reached across her body to grip at her right wrist. It's good to see you, too. A soft smile tugged at her lips. It's been a while. Winter's childish anger slipped through her fingers, even as she tried to cling onto it. She really had missed him so much it hurt. Tell me about it. As she looked on, he set his ladle down, then moved to meet her with open arms. See, Mir, wait, what? No, my body isn't ready. I haven't prepared my heart. For all her speed and skill, Winter couldn't retreat in time. Rather, a part of her simply didn't want to. Strong arms wrapped round her torso and drew her into an embrace, one she found herself returning despite her initial reservations. Her head touched his chest. She could hear his heartbeat as he drew her close like a long-lost friend. She inhaled reflexively and tasted the faint scent of fire and sunshine. Her hands tightened around broad shoulders. It felt like coming home. You look tired. Then he was drawing back, regarding her with a critical eye. Have you been eating properly? Winter's smile became a touch rueful. Of course she was tired. She'd flown here from Atlas on the fastest bullhead she could find. There had scarcely been any time to submit a request for leave, let alone rest or eat. That aside, she was admittedly famished. Military fare was bland at best and she'd never quite lost the taste of his cooking. He'd spoiled her. Regular food tasted like gruel compared with the culinary cuisine he'd fed her. Still, to suggest as much here would spawn rumors. I'm all right. Her mutinous stomach growled. Naruto quirked a brow. Doesn't sound like it. Actually, and now her mouth joined in the coop against her. I'm rather thirsty. Perhaps you could help me with that. Naruto's brow shot into his hairline. Hey, one could have heard a pin drop in the cafeteria, such was the silence that followed those words. Someone hooted in the background. It sounded suspiciously like Coco Adele. Hot damn, Weiss absolutely gasped. Winter, what's gotten into you? Her teammate chuckled. I dunno, sounds more like she wants something in her. Not the time, Zao Long. I regret nothing. Winter's mouth sealed shut in abject mortification. Knew she hadn't meant to say that aloud. Forgive me, she coughed into a fist. Perhaps I'm a bit tired after all. Naruto was her dirty little secret, the one she would never speak of to anyone. Not even Weiss knew the true extent of their relationship, if the word could be called such. Naruto wasn't her partner, nor her paramour, though she often found herself wishing for the later. In truth, he was something altogether simpler. He was simply her chef. Nothing more, nothing less, no matter what she might wish he would be. He prepared her meals when she was little and taught her the odd trick or two. This man had been a guiding influence in her formative years. Then father had fallen ill. Winter was no fool. She'd seen the signs coming long before anyone else. She had a front row seat at the time. Jack and Naruto had been bitter enemies even when she was a young girl. Mother liked Naruto, which of course meant father hated him. To this day, she still wasn't quite sure how or why he'd come to serve their family, only that he had. They'd often quarreled horribly. Small wonder the chef finally snapped. She didn't hold father's current state against him. No, the world was well rid of Jack Schnee. May that fool never recover. She still remembered that awful day when her mentor left. This ain't goodbye, you know. She sniffled at the time. It isn't. Nope, we'll meet again. I'm sure of it. Face rosy in the cold, she thrust her little finger at him. Pinky promise. Sure. His larger digit curled around hers. You know I never go back on my word. Now, years later, those very words had borne fruit. Vindication ceased, she rebuked herself instantly. No, she mustn't be seen lusting after him like a bitch in heat, no matter how good his foot was. It didn't matter that he was just as she remembered, that he hadn't aged a day. He was every bit as she remembered. No, even better, because she was older now, and he'd stayed the same. She was a young woman now, and the silly crush she'd nurtured had never felt more real. Even now she was keenly aware of his arms on her. Her knees twisted a little, knees rubbing together. Compose yourself, woman, her mind barked. You're a specialist. For crying out loud, show some tact. Her heart was having none of it. Belay that a ways in the back of her brain, a tiny Winter seized the wheel and gave it a hard spin. This ship is setting sail forward, ho. Why did her face feel so hot? Don't worry, Naruto let go of her and pivoted back to his kitchen. I'll whip something up for you. I've got a bit of food left over. Her face warmed anew. That's not really necessary. A soft ding told her it was too late. Tada. He presented her with a warm plate piled high with her favorite morning meal. Pancakes. At a glance it might seem silly, sentimental even. But there was a deeper meaning to that. He'd cut them into little bite-sized pieces, drizzled syrup across it, then sprinkled diced strawberries on top. She'd been a fussy eater back then. Always so stubborn, ever so picky, always so choosy, until he'd learned to adapt to her tastes. In a heartbeat, she was caught up in another memory. Yummy, a little girl grinned from her plate with a messy face. This is my new favorite. Bright blue watered as she blinked. You remembered. Of course I remember. Naruto beamed back at her. I didn't forget one bit about you, not one day, I swear. He tapped a finger to his forehead. I will always remember. One arm guided her down into a seat as the other set breakfast before her. Go on, eat. Winter took a bite, chewed, and swallowed. She told herself she knew what to expect. She had tasted his cuisine many a time as a child, and for that she'd been prepared. She was not. Ecstasy, joy, magnificence. She felt like she was melting into a puddle, as if all her clothes were slipping off her body. Winter was distantly aware of making a very unladylike noise rather akin to a moan, but were one to ask her later, she would have most emphatically denied it. She was quick to take another bite, then another, followed by another. This wasn't simply a meal, this was the food. The food was sacred, the food was pure, and the food was good. There was nothing else but the food. Food was love. Food was life. Respect the food. Her world began to spin, the sound of her hammering heart blotting out all else. In that moment she was keenly aware of his hand in hers, tan fingers threading through her pale palm. She couldn't think, couldn't move, could barely even breathe. Her body was burning, nay, it felt like a giant hand had massaged her very soul. More. She needed more. And yet her fork scraped against the plate. Aghast, she looked down only to find that the plate was clean. She'd licked it dry. She hadn't even noticed. It was maddening. She didn't want to go. Who was she kidding? She'd happily lop off her right arm to have another taste. To have gone without the food for so long, only to be reminded of its glory, it wasn't fair. And Weiss would get to taste this every day of her life. Not fair. While she, as a specialist, would have to return to Atlas and suffer through that god-awful fare once again. Not fair. There could be only one solution. Time to put her game face on, then. Winter straightened a little. May I speak to you in private? She expected him to refuse, to call her foolish. Imagine her surprise then, when he shrugged. Sure. All right kids, have fun. Naruto stood and swept an arm to the clones still scurrying about behind the counter. My boys will see to all your needs while I'm away. Weiss was trying to get her attention. Winter refused to look at her. Explanations could come later. For Noel, time to catch up. Shall we? When he offered her his arm, she bounded up and took it. An icy iris regarded the gawping students, daring anyone to object. We shall. Together they sauntered off. Don't what? Weiss blinked after them. What on earth just happened? Ospen regarded the scene from his office. He lifted high mug to his lips with a small smile. Well, this promises to be every interesting year. Naruto kept quarters in Beacon as a matter of pride. Oh, he had a house in Vale to be sure, but he seldom used it these days. Make no mistake, a lovely maid, such a nice girl, kept the place clean for him on occasion, but more often than not he found himself needed on campus for some reason or another. His quarters in Beacon weren't exactly Spartan, either. Dappled afternoon sunlight spilled down upon a cheery emerald carpet to paint the azure walls and ceiling a lovely shade of amber. A ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, providing a cool breeze against the muggy heat of summer. A homey little kitchenette was set in a corner away from the main furniture, flanked by a wine cabinet. Beyond that, a locked door led to an adjoining bedroom. Wouldn't do to let her see that. He'd not made his bed. Well, here we are. He let her in first. After you. Winter slipped in, her hip brushing his as she nudged past. It's she murmured, taking it all in at a glance. I didn't think. Think what? No. She shook her head. It's nothing. May I sit? Suit yourself. He shut the door behind her as she slid onto the couch. Naruto looked at her, then really looked at her, as he hadn't had a chance to before. She'd grown up. It seemed an obvious thing to notice, let alone say, but there it was. Gone was the spindly little girl he'd once served. In her place sat a brilliant young woman in the springtime of her youth. He didn't know what to make of this smoldering specialist in his room. Well, a part of him did, but that was one he viciously hushed. None of that. He wasn't about to make the first move. Not if he could help it. That was a choice he wasn't about to force upon her. Winter was a clever girl, whatever she was up to, and he had the feeling she was very much up to something. He knew she could do much better than a simple chef. She was destined for greatness after all. Maybe she'd marry that general up in Atlas someday. It wasn't his place to go around butting into her fate. He tried that more than once, and yet the moment he sat down, she looked fit to bolt. He didn't really understand that. So he stood again. Drink. I'm not that thirsty. The words burst out of her before she covered her mouth. Naruto quirked a brow. Didn't say you were. Winter made a keening noise between her teeth, then stomped a boot for good measure. Naruto blinked, and for a moment she was a little girl all over again, growling over another burned souffle, her face covered in soot and smudges. Heh. The memory stole a chuckle from him. She saw it and scowled. What's so funny? Just an old memory. He tittered softly. Do you remember when I first taught you to cook? Gods, I wish I could forget. Her face flushed. It's not fair. You haven't changed a bit. We all change when you think about it. He laughed softly. We're all different, all through our lives, and that's okay. That's good. His hand came down on her shoulder, holding her fast. You've got to keep moving. So long as you remember the people that you used to be, you'll be fine. She looked away. So about that drink. Yes. She bit the word out. Please, I've got some soda here if you'd rather. Whined. It was not a question. Some six told him not to belabor the point. Naruto selected a particularly good bottle and a pair of glasses besides. The Australian wine. Potent stuff. Nothing but the best for her. All the while he felt her eyes on him. When he turned round, he found her watching him like a wary she-wolf, wary of him and not liking his smile one bit. How wrong he was. He thought she looked agitated, that it had something to do with what he'd said, rather than what he'd done. Once again, he was so wrong. So very wrong. She eyed the vintage incredulously. How long have you had this? Few centuries. He uncorked the bottle and began to pour. It's pretty potent stuff. Had plenty of time to age it. And why not, as immortality was something of an open secret these days. Winter already knew of it, and Willow before her. Jack hadn't. Idiot made his own bed messing about with an immortal. Shame that poison hadn't been more potent. Might have done the world more good to be rid of him for keeps. Careful, he warned as Winter raised a glass to her lips. It's strong. Be that as it may, the specialist lifted her chin a little. I assure you I have the proper fortitude. She drank. Ack, her words dissolved into a harsh cough. Strong, very strong. Naruto bit back a laugh as settled in beside her. I did warn you. Her response was to knock another glass back. So he poured her a second. Winter down that, too, followed by a third. When she reached for a fourth, he held the bottle back. Liquid courage was all well and good, but he knew a schnee who drank too much already. The world didn't need another. You certainly made out well for yourself. Realizing he wasn't going to grant her another, she leaned back and crossed her legs. I wasn't aware you'd come to Vale. It's a long story. He poured himself his own glass at last and savored the burn. Wine wasn't something he indulged in often, but it suited his tastes well enough. A pall of uncomfortable silence fell over them as he drank. So, Naruto said apropos of nothing, how's life treating you? His words seemed to reactivate Winter because she all but dove on the topic. I'm a specialist now, sir. And you're happy? He swirled the wine in his glass, watching the red liquid slosh about. It reminded him of blood. Atlas is where you want to be. As you say, sir. Winter pouted and puffed out her chest a little, not noticing the way he averted his eyes and quickly raised them. Probably for the best. Wouldn't do to give her any ideas. Winter had always been a perceptive girl. Still, Naruto found himself blanching for other reasons. Sir, not that word again. Anything but that. Don't go calling me sir. All right, a muscle jumped in his jaw. You'll make me feel old. Yes, sir. Her lips twitched. Sorry, sir. His right eye twitched. Are you messing with me, Winter? The faint ghost of a smile plucked at the corner of her mouth. No, sir. There was the willful girl he remembered from years past. He'd missed her so. Speaking of missing, what brings you to Beacon? I came to check up on my sister. Winter was quick to reply, and quicker to snatch the bottle from him. Too quick, as if she rehearsed it over many hours like she was eager to lose herself in drink. It's important that she acclimates well here. She drank heartily, surprising him with her vigor. A schnee must excel, after all. Naruto read the white lie at once. Even after all these years he could sense negative emotions. Winter's had spiked just now. He could have called her on the carpet for it, accused her of tricking him. Instead he let her be. It really was good to see her again. She'd been such a diligent little student. You've been kind to Weiss, I hope. Another glass came and went between them both. Sure have. He barreled on, heedless of her sudden frown. Even made a bet with her. I'll be teaching her a few things. Her brow twitched. Is it so? Perhaps I need to have a word with my dear sister. Oh, dear. He knew that tone. Winter. It's nothing, sir. She changed gears quickly, throwing him off once more. May I speak with you again if time permits? His suspicion softened. Sure. My door is always open. Something wild flashed through her eyes. Naruto thought he recognized it. Almost looked like lust. No, surely not. Winter was Winter. She'd never been like that. Must be imagining things. On a whim, he decided to take things a step further. Surely there wouldn't be any harm in it. Here, he fished his scroll out of a pocket and offered it to her. Let's swap numbers. Her back stiffened. Truly. Well, he chortled, if you don't want to talk with an old man. No, I do. Her phone whipped out and touched itself to his. A faint chime sounded between them. Well, guess she didn't mind after all. There, that sorted. Winter leaned back and swayed a little. Maybe that was the wine. How much had she drunk again? He wasn't sure. Surely Winter wasn't that much of a lightweight. He looked back, only to find the bottle somewhat lighter than before. Odd. He'd only had a few glasses unless she drank half the bloody thing. Which she hadn't. She couldn't be that much of a lightweight. It just wasn't possible. Perhaps we could. Winter swallowed once and steadied herself against him. Spar some time. Sure, we can do that. He grasped at the words like a lifeline. Provided your stance isn't still full of holes. Trust me. She blinked up at him through her lashes, ran a hand down her flank, fingers trailing up and across her hip. My form has certainly improved. All right, even he wasn't that dense. A freaking brick wasn't that dense. Still, he had to be sure. He sniffed once. The scent of wine was strong on her breath, a fruity concoction that tickled at his nose. Winter, you're drunk. He croaked the words out. Tipsy at best. She didn't see the harem. That's not fair. Her words slurred but a little as she ran along the length of his arm. You ran away. A leg crossed his. I missed you. He jolted a little as Winter promptly used it as leverage to land in his lap, legs spread on either side. Not just your food, but you. A tiny hiccup escaped her lips. Not fair. You got what you wanted. I didn't. What about me? What about what I want? Blue eyes flashed. What about you? Is this going somewhere? She granted him a bleary grin. Yes, all the places. He frowned. You're drunk. Possibly. She slurred. Do you even care? Nope. Naruto sighed. Yup. Definitely tipsy. Probably smashed, knowing his luck. Why did she have to be such a lightweight? When he placed his hands on her hips and tried to nudge her off his lap, a pair of glyph pinned his hands where they were. So much for being a gentleman. Something warm and soft brushed his cheek. Her hips ground against his even as her breasts smashed up against his chest, creating a brand new ache. She leaned in and pressed her forehead to his, angled her head just so. Naruto snapped his head to the right. What was meant to be a simple peck on his cheek, well, it became something else altogether. Her mouth was warm and soft against his. Winter made a pleased noise and deepened the kiss. Her hands found the buttons of his jacket, fumbled at it and failed miserably. Her nose wrinkled adorably. Not so her jacket. She ripped it away and it slapped him in the face a moment later. Naruto blinked. Huh, black lace. She didn't strike him as the type. Good lord, you could get lost in those things. Unfortunately or fortunately depending on one's point of view, South Specialist mistook his silence for something else entirely and pushed him down against the couch. No, you're not going anywhere. For a moment, she sounded almost sober as she loomed. The glaze in her eyes said otherwise. Mind, you're mine. Oh, mine. A rueful laugh escaped him. I wasn't aware I was property. Yes, she swatted his chest. My Naruto, my chef. He laughed again, demanding. Enters took hold of his hands and guided them somewhere else entirely. His palms alighted upon something warm, soft, and infinitely yielding. This time her moan wasn't muffled against his mouth. Wine or not, it was difficult to ignore, downright impossible, really. For a moment his self-control fractured. He squeezed. Mistakes were made. Winter gasped in thin-liveiled delight, her lips peaking in a cry that was anything but soft. Oh dear. He'd flipped her switch. Yes, harder. She bent down and kissed him again, one hand reached for his belt. Tap, 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 and someone knocked on the door. Winter, a muffled voice permeated the wooden barrier. Are you in there? It's Weiss. Naruto craned his neck even as Winter began laying a line of very distracting kisses against it. How did she know they were here? Had she followed them? No, of course she had. He wasn't sure why he was surprised. She struck him as the sort to pry. Silly schnee. Wrong room, Winter sang off key. Go away, I'm not here. Yes. Naruto exhaled in a long-suffering sigh. Yes, she is. She glowered back at him. Traitor. Trust me, you'll thank me for this later. New Winter whined and kicked against his chest like a surly teenager, not the young woman she was. No failure. If you're that keen on this, I'll screw you when you're sober, not soused out of your mind. His one-time apprentice crossed her arms and sulked. Wanna do it now? Tempting, but problematic. He quirked a brow at her. Would you rather Weiss see you like this? See who like what? To her credit, Winter seemed to realize her compromising position immediately. She looked down, up at him, down again. Even in her stupor, she was still a schnee. Here at last her liquid courage seemed to fail her. Naruto gave her a gentle nudge and she fell to the floor and crashed backward with a yelp. That's it, I'm coming in. At that very moment, Weiss broke the lock and crashed inside. She didn't yelp. She was too ladylike for that. Her pale face still flushed 7 shades of scarlet. Why is my sister on your floor and where's her shirt? Winter raised a bleary hand. Hello. Naruto plunked back down on the couch and touched a hand to his cheek. He couldn't quite hide the smile from his face. This is my life now. I'm home. The door clicked open. Naruto didn't so much stumble as he did stagger across the threshold of his home. His shoulder struck a wall and he braced himself against it, pressing his forehead against the cool plaster to catch his breath. From there he immediately whirled and locked the door behind him. After a moment's thought, he laid a hand against the metal frame and activated the seal there for good measure. There, home secure. Wouldn't do to have someone come barging in after him again. Only then did he allow himself to hang up his coat, relax, and exhale. Weiss had been noisy to say the least when she'd caught him with Winter. Well, caught implied he hadn't expected her in the first place. More like she'd stumbled upon them. Winter hadn't exactly been quiet. Poor thing. Quite the shock to her system, that. Winter hadn't much helped in that regard. If anything, her bumbling and tipsy efforts had only made matter worse. She called them improper, and since Winter had been entirely too soused to care, words were spoken. In the end he'd left the two sisters to hash out their disagreement and gone home. To his actual home, since it didn't seem they'd be leaving his quarters at Beacon anytime soon. Oddly enough, he'd heard them say something about war before he left. Probably nothing important. Well, that was an experience. Kicking off his shoes, the weary chef patted his way into the living room. Wonder if she's working today. Pretty sure I gave her the week off. Never mind to smell food. His nose caught the faint aroma of a piping hot dinner long before he saw her. Sure enough, a familiar face was waiting for him when he rounded the corner into the kitchen. Welcome home, master. A dark-haired beauty clad in a white apron and absolutely nothing else awaited him. Hers was a body forged from pure sin, long leg and flowing curves paired with a generous bosom besides. As he looked on aghast, she bowed low at the waist, exposing a tantalizing expanse of creamy white skin both above and below. What would you like first? Golden eyes rose to meet his, framed by a coy smile. Dinner, a bath, or me? Naruto felt his right eye begin to twitch. This mustn't register on an emotional level. She was doing this to get a rise out of him and succeeding. Cinder, why he didn't dare avert his eyes, if only because he knew she'd do something else the moment he looked away. Every time, why do you always do this? Are you flustered? Her smile turned sly as she straightened and smoothed out a wrinkle in her apron. Does this bother you, master? Again with that word in a manner of speaking, yes. Then yes, I must. Her lips alighted upon his cheek, then she sashayed away back to the kitchen, giving him a generous view of her hips and much more besides. I had a feeling you might return today. As such, I went out and prepared your favorite. An ear twitched. Ramen, no resist. Pretty sure I gave you the week off, though. Why, master, she spun, touched a hand to her heart and swayed where she stood. You wound me. Would you cast a poor, defenseless maid into the streets? Yeah, no. He deadpanned. We both know you're anything but harmless. Molten Gold's orbs narrowed. Guilty as charged. There it was, again, that subtle hint of rebellion. Cinderfall had come into his employ some 2 years ago. She tried to recruit him at the time for some reason or another at the time. It hadn't gone well. For her. To be fair, Naruto really hadn't intended to break Cinder in such a manner, nor had he known she would become this at the time. It simply happened. One dish was all it took to seal her fate, followed by another, yet another, another. She'd been like this ever since. Sometimes he wondered if Cinder was secretly a masochist. She certainly did her work well enough to be sure, and he could never sense any negative intent from her. He wasn't blind. She was clearly up to something, but so long as Beacon was kept clear of it, he didn't much care. What was the old saying? Better the devil you know than the one you didn't, something like that. Whomever she really was, Cinder clearly didn't bear him any ill will these days. How could she? If she killed him, she would get any more of the food. He knew she had a life separate from this, but she seemed keen to keep them that way. Poor thing, probably didn't want anyone else to see her true self. She'd kill to keep her secret. Amusing as it might be to reveal this to the world, he knew she'd go absolutely ballistic if he ever outed her secret life. Another day, perhaps. Here you are. Cinder laid out the dish for him. I followed your instructions to the letter. She really had. Damn, but that ramen looked good. Naruto patted her head. Good girl. She preened a little as he sat. For a man who cooked everything under the sun, it was a simply joy to have food prepared for him. Naruto liked to bask in it whenever he could. He did even pay Cinder in the traditional sense of the word, if only because she refused it. She simply craved his food and demanded it as payment. Whatever her intentions were, he could at least keep an eye on her like this. And if anyone saw her in such a state, well, no doubt she'd gone to great lengths to keep her professional life separate from this. While searching, golden orbs turned to regard him before he could dig in. Did you bring me anything? I've been good. Naruto arched an eyebrow, unable to keep the smile from his face. Actually, all but choked on the word. No, I didn't say that. The other brow climbed yet higher still. Yes, she slumped. I was good. That's what I thought. Here, beneath her watchful eye, he extracted a small sealed case from his coat, one that contained today's leftovers. Her eyes lit up at the sight of it. He set it on the table and opened it slowly, allowing the faint aroma to do its work. Cinder inhaled once, and those golden eyes became glazed as she regarded the feast he'd set aside for her. Well, there went her switch. Times like these made Naruto think he might have gone a tad too far with her and the dishes he'd made. Just a touch. Just a little. Had he accidentally made her a food whore? Was that even a thing? Cinder reached for it, only to falter as he grabbed her by the wrist and reeled her in. She didn't fight in the least as she landed in his lap. You're in a mood today. Naruto only grunted. I'm afraid you'll have to earn your keep this time. To be fair, he hadn't been until a certain Schnee riled him up. Damn him for a fool and a gentleman both. Winter was pure because of that. He didn't want to sully her. Any choice she made should be one made of her own volition, not influenced by alcohol. Still didn't change the fact that he had a nearly naked woman sitting on his legs. Cinder felt him respond and shivered anew in his lap, knees twisting in thinly veiled ecstasy. Are you going to punish me? She'd probably save her a spanking. Crazy woman. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Maybe she cooed as her hips ground against his. I've been such a bad girl lately. That was a lie, and they both knew it. A laugh escaped him. You really haven't. Let me have this, blast you. In the silence that followed, his maid needed no further provocation. A hand reached up and tugged just like that. Cinder's apron slipped from her shoulders and puddled at her feet. Deprived of that flimsy article of clothing, she bared herself for him completely. Well, there was something he wouldn't mind eating. Her hands linked around his neck and she planted her legs on either side of him. Her forehead touched his, breath warm on his face. Here, she purred, let me help you relax, my master. This was the woman who once wanted to conquer Vale. Once, truly, Naruto had no way of knowing just how badly he'd broken Cinder fall. You have a maid. Yes, Naruto looked up at Weiss as he worked the next morning. She's a perfectly nice girl, if a little strange. Wait a minute. Why did it sound like Weiss was grinding her teeth? And just like that, the food wars intensified. Order up. Naruto attacked the weekend as he did all things with singular vim and vigor. Whistling a merry tune, he whirled a freshly cooked steak down the line, grinning as a clone took the plate and set to work. Even as it did, his hands were already moving on to the next, kneading dough at speed, threading it with chakra before whirling it onto another clone with a flick of his wrist. An amused doppelganger caught the wood pizza, spun it once and passed it on to another. Truly he was in a fine mood, which meant his boys were likewise in peak form. They had to be, especially when one considered just how early some students were known to rise. Even on a weekend the cafeteria was in full swing. Less mouths to feed perhaps, but that didn't make the requests any less varied. Miso ramen on the way, he pivoted and whipped a bowl at its intended target. Catch it or die. A grinning student with violet hair managed just that and sauntered away to a table with meal in hand, guarding it as one would gold. As she should, ramen was love. Ramen was life. Some students had impeccable taste. Such of those were few and fair between. His ears twitched as a faint chime to the right informed him of another order. Glazed hoisin and sesame salmon bowl. A girl with dark skin and a blue beret waved her hand. Here. The meal hit her open hands like a missile. She bowed once and scarpered with her prize before the crowd could swallow her up. Just as well, too. Grilled cheese. One of his clones whisked out another tray and was nearly set upon for his trouble. Poor bastard. You really shouldn't keep teenagers waiting. When they got hungry, they got hangry. Nobody wanted to deal with a hangry teen. Not even him, and he'd fathered at least 3 over the years. On a whim he winged a free pizza their way. It kept the mob from tearing into one another, at least. With the reprieve he'd granted himself, he had the rest served in short order. Crazy kids. Reminded him of his daughters. Come to think of it, pretty sure it's been a few months since I heard from Melusine or Bargast. Maybe I should call. Someone knocked on the counter behind Naruto, drawing him from his musings. Salutations. The immortal paused, blinked, looked down. Bright green eyes stared back, framed by an inquisitive freckled face and short curly orange hair. She cocked her head to one side and he mirrored the motion. Idly, he took in a gray-green dress and black leggings edged with green stripes. Huh, neat. That wasn't a beacon uniform, though. What was she doing here? Was she lost or something? Well, he muttered, you're new. What'll it be, kiddo? I am not hungry. She graced him with a beatific smile. I was just enjoying the smell. Naruto flung a glance over his shoulder. His clones shrugged back at him. Meh, kids these days were weird. He'd heard of some people who enjoyed scents over actual foods, but he'd never thought to meet one. To each their own, he supposed. He wasn't one to judge. So just to be clear, he waved a spatula at her. You didn't need anything. Affirmative, she snapped off an adorable little salute. I am simply here to observe. Well, observe away. He rolled up his sleeves and went back to work. One wave done, on to the next. I'm here all day. He felt those curious jade orbs linger on him regardless. A minute passed while he and his clones carried out their tasks. Still the girl didn't budge. Even as the last of the lunch rush trickled away and content students left to enjoy their hard-won weekend, she didn't waver. And then, Specialist Schnee speaks highly of you. Winter. Naruto perked up and turned to face her once. You know her. She is my friend. The strange girl linked both hands behind her back and swayed on her feet. I came with Specialist Schnee to compete in the Vital Festival. So that's the excuse she used to get here. He thumbed his chin. Ain't the festival still a ways away yet? A blink as he realized what that meant. So you're from Atlas, then? Indeed, I am combat ready. So you are. Yes. The girl bobbed her head in agreement, though her gaze lingered on the leftovers. Your food does smell very nice. Naruto chortled softly at her longing expression. Are you sure you're not hungry? I am not. She shook her head. Thank you for the offer. What was it with her and refusing to eat stranger and stranger? This one. You're clearly a student, so I'm not about to charge you for a meal, if that's what you're worried about. She paused, considered him anew. Specialist Schnee may require some for of sustenance. She was rather ill this morning. Of course she is. Naruto bit his lip to stifle the smile. Hangovers are no joke. Hold on a second. 3 rapid steps carried him to the cooler, where he extracted a bottle of ice water. It was the simplest thing to thread a bit of healing chakra through the frigid liquid. A few sips of this would expedite what might have otherwise been an awful 2 days for her. Hopefully she'd thank him for this. Here, he proffered it to her. Tell her to take a sip of this every hour. She accepted it reverently. I will do so. On a whim, Naruto stretched out his senses and regarded her with the entirety of his being. What he found there had him recoiling in surprise. He could sense her and yet, he couldn't. Her presence was muted, present yet distant. For all that she glowed in his mind's eye, her soul a deep vibrant green against her hollow casing. Wait, casing was she? He frowned anew at her. What's your name? Penny, the girl chirruped, clutching the bottled water to her chest like some precious lifeline. Thank you for the experience. I will return to Specialist Schnee. Have a sensational day. I hope we meet again. Wait. Penny paused. Yes. No, it's nothing. Tell Winter I said hello. I will do so. Her smile was pure as sunshine. Good day. Naruto watched her skip away. Yes, she actually skipped and shook his head at her passing. Strange girl, he muttered to himself. Maybe I should keep an eye on her. Whatever her origins, Penny seemed harmless enough. Yet for some reason he couldn't help but feel what was the word empathy. No, that wasn't it. Pity, yes, that was the one. If she really was what he thought she was, then he felt rather sorry for her. James and Pietro must have succeeded in their little project. Did a robot taste food? Sounded like a challenge. He liked challenged. A faint cough echoed behind him, interrupting his musing once more. He whirled to meet it with smile. Blue eyes widened. Weiss, right on time. I've come for my lesson. She looked prim and proper in her traditional white outfit if one were to ignore the apron. Really, he'd meant it was a joke, but it seemed she'd taken it seriously. Say what you would about Schnees, but they kept their word. No sign of her friends, though. Odd. Team RWBY seemed nigh on inseparable these days. Maybe they had a fight. Where's your team? She lifted her chin a little. Out. Naruto leaned against the counter, trying to hide his smile. Out where? In the city. She all but bit the words out. He knew it was the most he'd wring from her at the moment. Come on back then. He stepped aside and made way for her. We'll start with something simple. How about cookies? Everybody loves cookies. She huffed. I can do that, so long as you don't burn them. He placed one hand on her shoulder as he guided her toward the oven. Fire chakra reacts poorly when it's overstimulated. Weiss frowned. How poorly? Naruto mimed an explosion with his fingers and mouthed the word bang just once. Her already pale visage lost its color completely. Not that. Then all right, just watch me and listen to my instructions for now. He turned away, sprinkling a bit of spice over a cut of lamb. Take notes if you like. We've got all day. He heard a faint rustle of paper. Surprise, surprise. When he looked back, Weiss had a notepad and pen to hand. Adorable. So, she began apropos of nothing, you and my sister. That happened. In the winter, where had that come from? What about us? Her back went curiously stiff. Are the two of you? No, he waved a hand. Nothing like that. Strange. He felt a curious pang in his chest as he said it. She was pretty drunk at the time and we hadn't seen one another in ages, so. Just like Tat, the stiffness abated. So the two of you aren't. He blinked. Aren't what? It's nothing. She looked away. This is a nice kitchen. It really was, but even a blind man could have seen the change of topic for what it was. Naruto knew better than to poke a schnee. I have first claim to you in any case. She huffed. A blonde brow rose at her choice of words. Ho, Weiss growled. I mean your services. Sure you did. She subsided at last, watching intently as he worked. Her pen scratched against paper as she took studious notes. He wasn't to last. I don't understand, she asked suddenly. If you have all this skill and power, then why lower yourself to that of a mere chef? Must you always be so suspicious? He flicked her forehead. I simply want to showcase my talents and find someone who can truly enjoy my cooking. I have no particular objective beyond that. Truth be told, he held no ulterior motive. I'm not interested in world conquest. When her scowl redoubled, he offered a small shrug. I could rule if I want to. But why would I? Food brings people together better than any monarch could. Really, who wanted to rule Remnant? That was a pipe dream if he'd ever seen one. You couldn't very well rule 5 kingdoms. Menagerie still counted to him, no matter what some people might say, but it would take your entire life and an army besides. That was a thankless task, one he had no desire to revisit. Why conquer the world with strength of arms when you could do it with food? A lot less work, that. You might say my only goal now is to enjoy myself. He said at the last. And of course, I enjoy nothing more than the looks of delight my cooking inspires on people's faces. She opened her mouth to reply, only to be muffled by a morsel of warm bread. That's it. Naruto patted her head. That's the look. Never gets old. Her brow furrowed. For a reason such as that. His finger touched her lips before he could launch into another rant. This is not a discussion for the two of us, unlike the salt and pepper over there. He gestured to the well-prepared meal he'd been eating while he waited. It's not on the table. Now watch and take notes. If I'm going to teach you, then I'll teach you proper. A wink and he went to work. Properly. Weiss begrudged him a nod. Naruto beamed and went back to work. Before long he heard the faint scratch of pen against paper. Cinder was hungry. No, hunger implied she could last a while yet. She couldn't, because she was starving. With each passing moment that she sat here, she felt her stomach twitch. How it had only been a few days, surely she wasn't so weak that she'd lose herself this quickly, was she? Did it have something to do with the portions he'd only given her leftovers this time? Not a proper meal. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe she wanted more. Once upon a time, such a notion should have galled Cinder fall to her very bones. She loathed the idea of being beholden to anyone or anything. It would have, were she in her right mind. But then again, she hadn't been for quite some time, had she? Look, boss, I'm telling you, we need more men for this. Why had she agreed to meet Roman here again? Torchwick's words and excuses droned on and on as he made his report, an endless animal bleat that Cinder no longer bothered to pay attention to. She caught vague snippets of it, something about preparing to hit a shipment at the docks, but little more. She paid him lip service and nothing else. How much longer would this insipid meeting last? Cinder. Yes, you'll have your men. She waved a hand flippantly at him. Are we done here? Her pawn scowled, but didn't dare defy her. He knew better. Whatever her mood, he'd just assumed she was cross over something else. She waved a hand at him in dismissal, not trusting herself to speak further even as he beat a hasty retreat. Her mind was too frazzled to communicate properly, and her stomach twisted tortuously. Really, she wouldn't be cross if she could just eat something. One might think that a problem such as this could be solved by eating something. But she couldn't. Her taste buds had been spoiled to the point of no return. Regular food tasted like ash to her now. Her stomach wouldn't have it. No, it was Naruto's food or nothing at all. It was her drug, one she couldn't get enough of. She'd had dreams, ambitions, and she still had them, but everything else was secondary to the food. The food was love. The food was life. The food was all. Long live the food. Oh gods, I'd become a food whore. Thinking of it made things worse. Succulent sauces, meat that melted in her mouth, rice that tasted like sunshine itself. Sweat beaded upon her brow. Her stomach growled. Her knees twisted left and right in thinly veiled agitation. Though calm, she must remain in control. She would not cave to her base urges and bolt, for to do so threatened to expose her double life. The threat of complete and utter humiliation stayed her, if only just. Emerald finally noticed and fast her a curious look. Cinder, are you all right? You're acting strange. She blinked quickly. Too quickly. I haven't the foggiest idea what you mean. Her minion tilted her head. You're drooling, ma'am. Cinder wiped her mouth. You saw nothing. They must never know. Never, ever. She'd sooner die than reveal this side of herself to anyone else. And if she couldn't, she'd slay anyone who witnessed her behavior. Never mind Roman and Neo or even Emerald and Mercury, the rest of Salem's inner circle would make an absolute mockery of her for this. Hazel might not care one way or the other, but the rest were another matter entirely. She shuddered at the thought. Gods above, she could all but hear Tyrion and Watts cackling at her, mocking her, denigrating her for falling so far, to say nothing of Salem herself. Bezizite. Her scroll vibrated once in her pocket, prompting the Wood Maiden to withdraw it in a flurry of motion. Cinder frowned, looked down, saw the message, smiled as she read it, for 3 lines waited her within, written in a familiar scrawl. Made something a little different today. Plenty of leftovers. Hope you like ramen. Her heart performed an acrobatic flip against the walls of her chest and leaped into her throat. At last the food, glory be to the gods. Now if she could just make her way to his abode without drawing attention to herself, all would be well. Her cravings would sated for a time once more satisfied, leaving her free to plot and scheme as she had before. Mercury peered over her shoulder with childlike curiosity. Who's that friend of yours and what the heck is ramen? Cinder yelped and hastily stowed her scroll before he could get a good look at it. Nothing. Emerald and Mercury exchanged a wry look. Sound like something. And scent. They say time flies when you're having fun. Naruto pocked his scroll and wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. I think we'll call it a day there, he declared, regarding the rapidly darkening sky from the window. You did pretty good today, Weiss. Wouldn't want to wear you out. When he looked back, Weiss was sound asleep at the table, face down, her head buried in a cookbook. A tiny snore reached his ears. If her arms were covered in flour and her face was sprinkled in spices, he pretended not to notice. She hadn't been content to take notes after all, it seemed. Warmed an old man's heart, it did. She worked harder than he thought. Naruto pinched the brow of his nose. Of course she'd worked herself to exhaustion. Didn't stop him from tugging a blanket over her shoulders, though. Silly girl. Sue, someone came back late last night. How was he? Weiss refused to rise to the bait. She was a Schnee, and a Schnee did not allow themselves to be poked and prodded like some love-struck lass. Not here, not now, and certainly not with the rest of her team grinning at her like a bunch of cats with a canary. Still, she did smile a little as she brushed her hair. And if there was a faint hint of color in her cheeks, well, surely one would have mistaken it for the early morning light. And if anyone said otherwise, she'd stick them with Myrtenaster. He was quite nice, actually. She didn't look up while she corralled her hair into a ponytail. A fine instructor, the very essence of a gentleman. Judging by the drawling sigh that followed, those words were precisely what young Xiao Long didn't want to hear. Ah, Boo the blonde flopped back on her bed with a sigh. That's no fun at all. Where's the juicy details? You want details? A nasty little voice hissed in the back of Weiss's head. Ask my sister. She winced immediately thereafter. No, such thoughts were unbecoming of her, weren't they? She and Winter had never really competed for something before, much less someone. Time and age had prevented such petty sibling rivalry when they girls. Indeed, by the time she was old enough to realize just what Naruto might have been to her sister, Jack had been poisoned. Shortly afterward, Winter ran off to the military, leaving her to shoulder the responsibility of the SDC alone. Yet now, when she thought of what she had seen between those two that day, an odd ache manifested in her chest. Weiss, a hand waved before her face, startling her. Remnant to Weiss, anybody who Ruby, stop that, she flailed at the pale palm, swatting it away. Get your hand out of my face. Sorry, not sorry. Her partner rocked back on her heels. You weren't paying attention. Long lashes fluttered in an irritated blink. Attention to what question? Yang leaned forward. Did he at least give you a goodnight kiss? Weiss whipped her pillow at Yang's head and powered at least 2 glyphs. It struck the brash blonde dead in the face and sent her toppling out of her bunk with a squawk. When she tried to rise, another pillow sent her crashing back down to the floor and kept her there. True, she hadn't been paying attention. But that was no excuse for Yang to mock her. Really, it wasn't her fault. She had every reason to daydream. Yikes. Ruby peeked down at her twitching sister and winced. Remind me to stay on your good side. Don't want to end up like her. Weiss huffed, her temper mollified by Young's groan. Refrain from making crass comments and you'll be quite safe. The little Reaper beamed. Whatever you say, bestie. Bah, let her daydream about her teacher. Yang ribbed from the floor. Not like she'll get any. A spot of high color hit Weiss' cheeks. He's not a teacher. Besides, such a thing would be, well, indecent. No, Yang grinned. Isn't he teaching you? Weiss made angry Weiss noises. I think he might be. Lake didn't look up from her novel, but her words carried weight all the same. A teacher, that is. Niskowicz said he covers for her in Oobleck from time to time. Weiss perked up. That was news to her. And hadn't she left one out there? What about Port? 3 eyebrows rose as one. What about Port? All right. She raised her hand to fend off their incredulous stares. I'll admit, I walked into that one. You did. But their resident bookworm wasn't finished yet. Still, he's quite the capable cook. She turned a page without looking up, seemingly ignorant of their attention. I like his seafood dishes. He makes a mean tuna melt, to say nothing of a casserole. Always the fish dishes with you. Young sniggered. What are you, part cat or something? Blake's bow twitched. No, bah, have your tuna. Weiss waved a hand. Some of us have a more refined palate. And what would you know about good food? Schnee golden eyes peeped over the cover, utterly devoid of mirth. You probably ate caviar all day back in Atlas. I did no such thing. She rather disliked caviar, thank you very much. Young thumbed her nose. Watch out there, Weiss screamed. You've got some competition. Lovely. First her sister, then the mention of that maid, and now this was the last thing she needed. Was it so wrong to want something so mean for herself, someone who treated her not as a Schnee, but as a normal girl? Make no mistake. Her team was wonderful and she adored them, even if she did want to throttle Blake on occasion, but there was something about him that spoke to her as nothing else did. She refused to call it attraction. Not yet. Her pride wouldn't allow it. But she was curious all the same. Perhaps it was his stubborn refusal to quit. It might be his patience, for anyone willing to attend so many students surely must be a saint. Maybe it was pure determination in that he seemed determined to defy her expectations with every dish. Unfortunately, others had taken note of him. Winter was bad enough, but at this rate, she'd be beating girls off with a stick just to get her lessons. Besides, she'd seen him first. You really didn't. Ruthless reason betrayed her. Winter did. He was cooking for her long before you were a twinkle in your mother's eye. Then I found him first. Was she jealous? No, certainly not. Her mind began to whirl. This would not do. Nor, sir, it simply would not do. Something must be done. Someone giggled. It wasn't Weiss. All the blood drained from her face. She'd said that aloud, hadn't she? Against her better judgment, Weiss looked up. Young's grin reminded her of a wolf, ready to pounce. Ruby didn't quite grin, but she was the one giggling. Blake's smile was insufferably smug, not at all hidden behind her book. That a girl? Weiss screamed. Young pumped a fist into the air. Fight for your man. Another pillow sailed out to smack her in the face. Weiss dove on Young with a mighty holler. You heard nothing. Winter found herself torn between her wants and her needs. Case in point, what she wanted to do right now and what she intended to do were two very different things. She wanted to retreat to her quarters, dive under her bed and pretend none of this happened. But what she needed to dowel, that was something else entirely. Her heels clicked harshly against the empty halls of Beacon as she walked stalked to her destination. The few passersby she encountered took one look at her stormy expression and made way. Just as well too, she was so lost in her thoughts that she might well have bowled them over without realizing it. More than once she muttered a half-hearted apology when she nearly ran someone down. Foolishness. She rebuked herself. How could I let myself slip like that? The hour was still early and Winter thanked the gods for it, if only because there were so few to see her making such a spectacle. Her pale face burned at the reminder. She had made an utter fool of herself and must make amends now, lest he think her some drunken floozy. She was not a floozy. Even if she had rather enjoyed Naruto's hands on her no-stop cease-desist. She gave her head a mighty shake, hair flying behind her as she walked. Really, the booze was to blame. Not her. She'd been so happy to see him and as such, had overindulged. Her emotions got the better of her. She tried not to think of the encounter with Weiss that followed nor the bitter argument which ensued. She couldn't remember much of that either. There would be time to mend things with her sister. For now his pride was wounded and she must attend to it. In all fairness, Naruto wasn't hard to find, nor did he make any attempt to hide. And you really do need to eat more, Velvet. He was chastising a rabbi-tared faunus in the cafeteria as Winter drew within earshot. Your fighting style burns up a lot of calories. Here. He shoved a rather sizable boxed lunch at her. This should tide you and your team over on that mission of yours. She accepted it with a wince. Isn't this a lot? It's meant to feed the four of you over several months. Make sure Coco doesn't eat it all. Now scoot and good luck. The bunny bowed and scarpered with her prize, forcing Winter to make way. Even then she dithered, uncertain of what to say. Her knees quivered, threatening to buckle if she took so much as single step. A finger twirled in her hair and she cursed herself for letting it down today. It had been a moment of weakness, a girlish flight of fancy. She wanted to see what he thought of it, but now she began to wonder if he'd ever notice at all. Though she was a specialist, she wouldn't falter here. Steeling herself, Winter mastered her legs and crept closer. One step now, 2, 3. She was nearly upon him. His back was still turned, gaze fixed firmly, some new culinary creation she didn't recognize. A hand swept out, sprinkling a line of spices across the meat. Another brought a knife down upon it, dicing it into fine chunks upon the carving board. She peeked over his shoulder, entranced by his work. It really did smell quite nice. Her stomach twitched as the faint scent reached her nose. I hear you. Winter stiffened, flushing like a child with their hand caught in the proverbial cookie jar. Naruto had yet to look back at her, but she could hear the smile in his voice, the amused lilt to his words. He sounded more amused than anything else. Not angry with her. Good. She'd only ever seen him angry once. Father had been poisoned shortly afterward. One simply did not upset the chef. Well, his wrist flicked, pushing the chunks of meat onto a plate, then drizzling them with a sauce she didn't recognize. Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to help me? You're not using your clones this morning. No. He smacked his lips. Got a bit of headache. So a blue eye peeked over his shoulder. You up for it? Her eyes lit up. May I? An apron flew out and smacked her in the face. Winter donned the black garment quickly and slipped over the counter to join him. In short order, master and apprentice fell into a familiar rhythm. She was admittedly rusty after all these years, and he'd not taught her much, but she knew enough to help him. She gloried in it. This felt good, right, pure, as if he'd never left the manor. As they worked, she found her voice. I wish to apologize for my behavior. Finally sober, are we? Winter's pale face turned red. I am so terribly sorry for the mess I made. Naruto whirled and thrust a spoon into her mouth, silencing her. Her eyes widened as plucked it free a moment later, leaving her mouth full of food. Waste not, want not. Instinct kicked in. Winter's mouth betrayed her and she began to chew. Moist chunks of meat melted in her mouth, forcing her to swallow. And the moment she did, flavor. Winter's knees buckled as she moaned. That's no fair. She whimpered. You can't win an argument with food. Can, have, and I will. I raised 3 girls. He leaned back against the counter, grinning from ear to ear as she looked away. Trust me, what you did pales in comparison to their antics. Her heart skipped a beat. You have children. What did that mean? Was he married? Oh gods, was she trying to seduce a married man? Eternal youth has its perks. Naruto shrugged, heedless of her fear. But to answer your question, yes. Only 3, all from the same mother. Winter felt her throat close. Come, she must be calm. Where is she now? Gone. His expression became decidedly pinched. No longer with us, I'm afraid. She didn't take to this world as kindly as I did. She died, then. He hadn't said it, but she could see it in his eyes, that faint hint of mourning, not quite suppressed. Was it wrong that she felt relieved not for the poor woman's death, but the knowledge that she'd not impugned her honor? She had standards after all. I'm sorry, she said instead. Don't be. He beamed. It was an age ago. A new thought nudged at her. Your daughters, are they? Barghest, Baobin Sith, and Melusine. He recited them from Rota with ease. Barghest the eldest, Sith's the second, and Melusine's the baby of the group. She's always been a bit of a daddy's girl, that one. They're all out traveling the world. Haven't seen them form. A rare frown marred his whiskered visage. Years, I think I call them every now and again. If he saw her concern, he didn't show it. They're good girls, just gleany after their mother left. Quick as can be, he set the dish aside and laid it with herbs. I should probably warn you, they can be a bit eccentric. Winter's frown redoubled. When you say left, did you mean left or died, perchance? He never had a chance to answer her. A blur cannon through the wall bowled Winter over and slammed into Naruto. Found you. Winter sprang up and flung herself out of harm's way as another blast rocked the cafeteria, half expecting an attack, bracing herself for pain. It never came. A bright eye creaked open to find a frightfully tall blonde woman easily head and shoulders above herself hoisting Beacon's chef into the air and squeezing him with all her might. Papa, Winter choked. Puh. Naruto grunted, quite trapped in the intruder's armored arms. Down, Barghest, you're gonna break your old man's ribs. Winter blinked. Once, twice, thrice now. An odd, giddy thought hit her, then. Wait a moment. She balked. Does this make me an ant, or? The towering woman dropped Naruto like a sack of potatoes. Mismatching eyes narrowed. We have an ant, now. Winter frowned. Wait, who is we? Her words peaked into a yelp. All she realized, this Barghest woman hadn't come alone. Her sheer size had simply concealed the others behind her. By the time she realized this, it was already too late. Someone absolutely squealed and additional blurs slammed into Winter, all but riding her down to the floor. Stars spun before her vision, leaving her to glimpse wild eyes and wild hair through bleary eyes. It would appear her intended hadn't been kidding. Not a bit. Somewhere behind her, she heard Naruto sigh. I warned ya. Welcome to the family. Winter wasn't sure this qualified as a real family. That said, she wasn't about to question 3 girls with monstrous strength, least of all when they were fawning over her. Well, a tiny tired voice in the back of her head sighed, this is my life now. Of the unlikely trio currently admiring her, only the largest bore what was her name again, Barghest. Yes, that was it, even a passing resemblance to Naruto, the others even less so. The redhead currently fussing over her shoes didn't look a thing like the bemused blonde looking on, while the little white-haired girl peppered her with so many questions that she couldn't possibly keep up. She struggled in silence to recall their identities lest her mentor need remind her once more. She wouldn't be able to take another burst of embarrassment like that. Right, she rallied. Think. The redhead was Baobin Sith, an unusual name, but she'd not knock it while the smaller one, washer name, started with an M. A sharp tug on her hair had the specialist jumping. Oh, Melusine. In the end, it was Naruto's call from the kitchen that saved her. Don't pull on her hair. That's rude. But it's so pretty, his youngest daughter cooed, running her fingers through her. And just like mine. That's very nice, but ask before you play with her hair. A distant clamor caught here. No, Barghest, not like that, you'll burn the roast. The moment he looked away, a hand darted toward the back of Winter's head. The startled Schnee had all of an instant to protest. It availed her not. Even as she opened her mouth to argue, those nimble fingers did something and her hair tumbled free from its bun. The little knight hummed, content in her mischief. You really do look like my mother. Winter's mind rebooted. It had never quite occurred to her that she might have them. Children. Just thinking of it turned her world topsy-turvy. No, she mustn't think like that. It was inappropriate. And yet her mind betrayed her like a bashful blizzard. Her hands flew to her face as she imagined a little boy tugging at her arm. Bright blue eyes framed by whiskered cheeks and pale platinum blonde hair. It was too much, too hard, too fast. Her heart leaped into throat. She lost her balance. Winter made happy winter noises and crashed to the floor in a dead faint. Barghest raced over and nudged her with a boot. Did we do that? Dunno. Melusine mirrored her expression. Is she all right? Bayabin shrugged. She's lost in her own little world. Naruto heaved a sigh. Girls. Weiss blinked. First once, then twice. Finally thrice now, as she struggled to take it in. She took a deep breath. Inhaled, exhaled. This mustn't register on an emotional level. She was above such pettiness. It didn't bother her. She was calm. She felt nothing. Her heart was cold as frozen ice. Yes, this did not bother her in the least. It bothered her a lot. What in the blue hell happened here? Given the sight before her, Weiss felt she could be forgiven for a bit of crass language. She'd come down for lessons and stumbled into this mess. Her dear sister lay sprawled on the kitchen floor. Weiss could only pray she was sober this time around, her face redder than Ruby's cloak. Steam rose from the elder Schnee's scarlet visage as a torrent of gibberish poured forth from her lips. Had that been the end of it, she might not have minded. But who in blazes were those three women, and why did each of them have whiskered cheeks? Oh, the tallest of them, a great beast of a blonde, saw her first. And who's this? Do not Naruto thrust himself between her and the trio before they could descend upon her. One stunned Schnee is bad enough. As for you, perfect timing. He looked up from her sister's prone form. I'm afraid we might have to delay our lesson today. Your sister is a bit of a mess right now. Winter moaned where she lay, eyes rolling in her head. Babies. Naruto winced. Don't suppose you could. Weiss pinched the bridge of her nose. She could guess. Take her back to her room. Naruto clasped his hands and bowed his head. Please and thank you, I'll make it up to you. He'd best. Weiss huffed a little. Inevitably, her gaze was drawn to a nearby pastry upon a platter. Strawberry. Well, if she had to leave, then she'd at least sample one of his snacks. Her heels click-clacked against the kitchen floor as she stepped forth to claim it for herself. I'll just have a bite before I go, then. Before he could protest, she plucked the sugary confection from its plate and brought it to her lips. Wait, Naruto's warning fell on deaf ears as her mouth opened. Not that one. Weiss took a dainty bite, something to curb her appetite, nothing more. One bite. That was all. What could possibly be the harm? What indeed? Flavor exploded across her tongue. Her body locked up and her world went white as her every sense betrayed her. Even her knees buckled, quivering before a sudden and sheer burst of delight. A noise fled from her lips, one she would later realize to be a moan. And her clothes exploded. They physically shredded themselves, flying froth from her body. Credit where it was due, she reacted quickly. Her eyes bulged and she dropped down, covering herself with a shriek. What is this? To be fair, Naruto raised a finger. I warned you. Girls, maybe go with her. Get her some clothes. 3 pairs of shining eyes rounded on her. Weiss didn't even have time to whimper. They spirited her and went her away in a swirl of silk. They hit without warning. One moment Naruto was watching them go, shaking his head at the madness that was his life and contemplating another culinary creation. Nothing more, nothing less. In the next, a slender form crashed into him from the side. He recognized the faint scent of fire and ash immediately. A sigh stifled itself against the back of his teeth. Today was going to be one of those days. Through a thin, almost reedy voice whined in his ear, a far cry from its former strength. Now, hello, Cinder. He didn't look up from the task at hand. Is it that time already, and how'd you get into Beacon? She tried to hiss at him, but all that emerged was another whine. Please, she begged, grinding herself against his leg. I'm starving. I'll do anything. You sure about that? I gave you leftovers just the other day, aren't you being a little greedy? Her silence was telling. Naruto sauntered into kitchen with a rueful smile. Whipped. Cinder trailed after him as a starving dog might their master. Damn you. 000. What did I just see? Something was amiss here, but what? Emerald ducked back down past the window. No, she shook her head. This had to be a part of the plan. Cinder must have a reason for acting like this. She must. Right. The gods were laughing at her. Weiss just knew it somewhere. Someone. Somehow. The brother gods were looking down upon Remnant from on high and actively enjoying her misfortune. It was the only explanation that made a lick of sense these days. Her life had been, well, not simple, but orderly. Her career set in a neat pattern, determined to follow it to the exclusion of all else. She would go to Beacon and pick the perfect partner for herself, find a team, lead said team, and she'd met Ruby. Things went downhill from there, but looking back, Weiss knew she could have course-corrected. She should have taken charge, turned things around. Schnee were meant to lead, not follow her, so she thought. Instead, she'd met the chef of Beacon and taken him up on a foolish wager. In her arrogance, she had wanted nothing more than to prove him wrong, which she wished to prove the world wrong. She'd been prideful, foolish. He'd rebuffed her, turned her down, and she wanted to show him up. She'd failed and found herself roped in as his student. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Madness had crept into her life after that, gradually at first, like an assassin in the dead of night, slowly as to not be noticed until it was too late. Because make no mistake, any fleeting chance she might have had at a normal life was long gone. Killed, stone dead, all by that bloody blasted chef. Bad enough that she had to fight her own sister for Naruto's attention. Unfair, but he had children. That was another wild hurdle to make sense of. It certainly didn't help that they were fawning over her as if she were some fine jewel, much less trying to dress her for the night. At least she'd managed to commit their names to memory. That was a gaffe she wouldn't endure again. Winter was of no help at all. She was every bit a giggling, giddy mess as Beop Sith attended her. She'd find no aid there. Her sister had long since succumbed to tonight's pampering. Why were they gushing about shoes? No, never mind. She didn't want to know. Ordinarily she would have turned to her team for aid. Boo what? Wee. Holy shit, she heard Jan crow from her bunk. How strong are you? Vargas preened as she lifted her arms. Strong, apparently strong enough to dangle Ruby from one arm while simultaneously letting Blake sit on the other shoulder. Yang looked like she'd fallen in love. Traitors, the lot of them. This treachery would be remembered. Mama, hearing the word, made her jump. Are you all right? And then there was Melusine. Cease that at once. Weiss coughed into her fist to hide her blush. I'm not your mother. No, but you have hair like hers. The girl smiled at her, reverently running. And you look like her, a little. You should keep your hair down. That settled it. She was an absolute darling. Weiss felt her heart kick against her chest as she imagined it. Their children well look quite nice. Actual in a treachery and tricks she would not succumb. Weiss looked left. Weiss looked right. Weiss made certain no one was looking. And then, she deigned to pat Melusine's little head. Good girl. The girl hummed and nuzzled closer to her. Pure child. Protect. A scroll flash told her the moment had been preserved for posterity. Weiss absolutely whirled, eyes ablaze. Yang's eye along delete at this instant. Wherever Naruto was, she prayed he was subject to just as much madness as she. It was only fair, after all. Freeze. A flashlight snapped on in the dark, startling Sun Wukong. Food is sacred. A voice intoned behind it, low and ominous. You have violated the sanctity of this cafeteria tonight. What do you have to say for yourself? His body did just that, hands up, hands twitching behind his back. Shit, not like this. He didn't want to go out like this. Hey, he was new to Beacon, alright, starving, too. Sure, sneaking down to the kitchen hadn't been the best of ideas, but really, could you blame him really? He was just going to raid the fridge. Not like it was a crime or anything. Something smacked against his skull. Felt like a frying pan. Whoa, Sun raised his arms. Chile just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The light wavered and he glimpsed the blonde behind it. A brow rose. By sneaking into my kitchen in the middle of the night. To his credit, the faunus blanched. No point pretending otherwise. Sorry, Naruto's right, I twitched. Kids these days. An empty bowl clattered onto the table behind him. Naruto blinked. Sun mirrored it. No, go ahead. The faunus waved a hand when the older blonde didn't budge. I'm not going anywhere. You do, bro? Still keeping the flashlight on him, his fellow bond pivoted on one heel. Sun squinted into the light, only narrowly catching sight of cremeon pink hair, mismatching eyes, and a grin that would have grim running for the hills. Whoever they were far, far too short. Naruto quirked a brow at the intruder. Come for more ice cream, have you? She opened her mouth and stabbed a finger at it with a pointed, if slightly murderous expression. Greedy girl, Neo. He stepped back toward the freezer. It's after hours, so I'll whip something up for you. But don't tell anyone. Sun raised an arm. Any chance I could have some kinda hungry? Here. Neo offered a soundless gasp and clutched the bowl to her chest. The chef of Beacon glared bloody red daggers at him. Sun didn't dare move, until the chef finally drew back half a step. Thumbed his chin. Shrugged. Why do I feel like I'm forgetting something? Cinder was starving. Even now her stomach twisted and knotted in on itself like a physical force, the sheer cramps of which threatened to drive her down to her knees. Damn it. Damn him. Damn her for being so weak. She couldn't hold back any longer. Her face crumpled as she reached for the door. She fumbled for her keys, only to drop them. Cursing, she reached for them, trembling fingers grasping. A hand closed around hers before she could. Ma'am, what are you doing here? Glinda eyed the appetizer as one might a ticking time bomb. Stern green eyes swept left. Now right. Not a soul in sight. The kitchen was empty, still and silent as the grave. If there was an intruder, she'd not seen them. It wasn't unusual for Naruto to putz about during the night in preparation for the morning, but to trigger an alarm, no, that alone was unusual, enough for her to investigate. What's this? He'd left something behind. Little more than a morsel, really, a tiny chocolate cupcake placed on a plate near an empty bowl of what she assumed had been ice cream. Anyone could have eaten it in a single bite, and yet this had been left untouched for some reason. Why leave such a thing here? Had he been distracted? No, wait. There was a note. For my favorite colleague. Sorry if we woke you. Enjoy. A faint hint of pink hit her cheeks. Cheeky fool. She'd built up a tolerance to his food over the years, and they both knew it. Surely it was harmless. She snatched it off the plate and popped it into her mouth. Green eyes widened. And that's why I'm substituting for Miss Goodwitch today. Apparently she can't handle her sweets. Weiss winced. I think you meant Goodwitch. A blonde brow quirked. Right then Naruto clapped his hands, startling the lot of them. Glinda's a little indisposed at the moment. His gaze swept over the assembled students before him, muttering something about making a cupcake too potent. Potent, what was he on about? So I'm here to pick up the slack. Any questions? Everyone's hand sands that of Weiss went up. Any questions not pertaining to food? The hands went back down. Weiss wilted. She'd always known Naruto was capable of combat. This was Beacon after all. Even the janitors likely knew a thing or two. But to see such skill firsthand, that was a privilege, one above and beyond what he had taught her in the kitchen. She swore she'd make the most of this opportunity. Okay. The older blonde cracked his neck from side to side, producing an awful pop each time. Let's see ya. A fist smacked down into an open palm. I've got it. Today I'm going to teach you lot what happens when you find yourself facing a superior opponent. A murmur rippled through the students. Weiss winced. She didn't like where this was going. But I'm pants when it comes to paperwork, so I think a practical demonstration is in order. His gaze roved over the lot of them, searching for something. Evidently he failed to find it because those whiskered cheeks fell in a frown. Hey, whatever. Naruto grumbled like the surly chef he was. Can't believe I agreed to thizzle right, come at me. Young's brow shot in her hair. She touched a finger to her chin. You talking to me? No, I mean all of you first years. He beckoned lazily. This is combat class, right? I'm just a substitute. I ain't doing this more than once. Gasps went up. Ruby grinned in anticipation. It made sense. Weiss supposed after all, it wasn't every day they had a chance to learn from a master directly. Still, something nagged at her. Sir, aren't you going to use your weapon? Weiss, I told you not to call me sir. And I am. Before their very eyes he whipped out a strange scroll of some sort and ran his thumb across it. In a plume of smoke his hand gripped. What the hell? It wasn't a sword, or a shield, or even an axe. He was holding an honest-to-goodness frying pan in his hand. Cast iron at that. The kind one used for camping. The heavy kind. A flick of his finger sent the blunt instrument twirling in his fingers, dancing across his knuckles with frightful ease. Behold the frying pan of fear. His smile was nothing short of merry. Trust me, you don't want to get hit by this. Weiss recoiled. You can't be serious. Of course I'm serious. He gazed at a lazy spin. Would you rather I use the rubber band of doom? A whimper of fear went up from the second and third years. Not that Coco hissed. Anything but that. See, she understands. All right, first years. Naruto beckoned with one hand. We're wasting daylight. I've got lunch to prepare. So let's see. His free hand rose, sweeping over them. RWBY and JNPR. Team SSSN2, while you're at it. Come on up now. His smile had far too many teeth. Don't be shy. No one budged. No, then I'll have to call my associate. He placed 2 fingers to his lips and whistled. Neo. The air unfolded behind him and a petite girl appeared from the ether. Someone whimpered in the back. Weiss wanted to whimper herself. Wild pink-brown hair and mismatching eyes aside, the chef's associate didn't look all that friendly. Why was she pulling a blade from her umbrella? She'll be responsible for disciplining Harem. Naruto coughed into a training SSSN and JNPR today. RWBY and the rest you're with me. Not a soul moved. Really, the chef blew out a breath, shoulders slumping. Relax, he drawled. I told you to attack me. I'm hardly going to revoke your meal privileges over this. Tell you what, a hint of wry amusement touched those whiskered cheeks of his. Winner gets a full-course meal from yours truly, no questions asked. Blonde brows wagged at them. I'll make anything you want. Bah, as if they were enough to incentivize the others. A roar went up behind her. Ruby lunged with a war cry that would surely put fear into the hearts of mortals everywhere. For cookies. Really, Blake wasn't far behind. For tuna, Mercury took a sharp step backward. Reite, they're clearly cracked. I'm not feeling well, any chance I could be excused. Naruto whipped the frying pan at the back of his head. The silver-haired boy toppled like a fallen tree, but the pan didn't stop there. Still airborne, it boomeranged back and landed in its master's waiting hand. From there he used it to catch Ruby's scythe on the round edge and drag it down. Her teammate had enough time to squeak in surprise. Nothing more. The pan parried. The pan punished. Bonk. He rapped Ruby smartly across the head. She slumped to the floor, eyes spinning. Weiss balked and flicked a glance to the screen above. One hit. A single hit ripped her aura away. Hey, not one to be outdone. Yang launched herself at him with her gauntlets, only to receive a spinning kick for her troubles. Even from here Weiss heard her ribs creak. Xiaolong struck the mat, bounced once, and landed out of bounds. She struggled up onto her elbows only to slump as that wicked pan winged her in the face. 2 down, all in less than 2 seconds. What's wrong? Naruto hefted his impromptu weapon with a cheery smile. Where did all that confidence go? I'll go left, Blake murmured in her ear. You hit him from the right. Weiss surged in, Mighternaster trailing a silver arc before her, Blake not far behind. It was an exercise in futility. His body bent and twisted at impossible angles, strikes flowing up and around her guard. A fist swept in and caught her in the torso, physically lifting her from the floor. She folded over his fist and held on for dear life. Almost lazily he tossed her into the air, parried Blake on the backswing, caught her weapon by its slender ribbon and oh dear. Weiss winced. Well, this was going to hurt. That was all she had time to consider before a Blake-shaped missile hit her square in the face. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. To be fair, I did warn you not to underestimate the frying pan. Did you have to hit us so hard you gave me a black eye? Blast you. Weiss whined as her feet kicked out against the sofa. Said whining dissolved into a sullen snarl as she banged her already bruised knee. Naruto rapped it patiently despite HR struggles. Unfortunately, that only made her injuries ache all the more. And she had many. Aura was a marvel. It protected you against debilitating injury to be sure, but in the same vein it did nothing to lessen the force behind a blow. If you were hit hard enough or fast enough, the impact still made it through. She and the rest of Team RWBY had the injuries to prove that. It wasn't fair. He was supposed to be the chef of Beacon, a man who made devilish delicacies capable of making the very grim weep with joy. She'd known he was strong. Anyone who could catch Winter's eye had to be. But after Aloe this time she'd thought his talents would lay in the culinary realm. Nothing more, nothing less. Instead he'd taken them to task, like a couple of rank amateurs. Just thinking of it left her hanging her head in shame. There, Naruto tutted, took her by the chin and applied a bit of gauze to her cheek. You did well. Better than your sister, at any rate. She perked up. Really? No, stop. You're trying to distract me. I'm really not. He made a pleased noise as he finished affixing the bandage with a bit of medical tape. First time I trained her, she didn't even last a second. You managed 9. Granted, you had help, but I did bludgeon you with a Blake, who wouldn't stop sulking, come to think of it. Fine by her. Time spent sulking was time she wasn't haranguing Weiss for her heritage. That alone could be considered a win. She wasn't rightly sure what had gotten into her teammate as of late. Probably nothing important. In all likelihood she'd calm down soon, hopefully before they went into Vale to scout out the vital festival competition. Right. Open wide. Why would on remnant would Imp? Weiss growled as he stabbed a spoonful of something into her mouth. Reflexively she swallowed and shot him a scowl. What was that? Ice blue eyes fixed upon the tiny bowl of chocolate pudding in his hand. Some kind of dessert. It's strangely sweet. My own special chakra pudding. The blonde leaned back. Boost aura, promotes healing. She squirmed where she sat. I feel like I could run a mile. It makes you hyper. He finished with a smile. There's a reason it's not one of my mainstay dishes. Eat too much and you'll be bouncing off the walls all day. Of course, you could always go to the infirmary. The chef grinned. I'm sure Kurama and Kitsune would be happy to have you. A bead of sweat ran down her brow. Why do those names not fill me with confidence? They shouldn't. Now open up. Her lips parted. The corner of Naruto's mouth curled in a bemused grin as he continued to spoon-feed her. It made her heart flutter in the worst way. She stomped it down. No. She refused to fall for him. Never mind the fact was older than her. She only wanted him for his culinary capabilities. Didn't she? The fact that he could fight shouldn't mean anything. And yet it did. Still, this gave her a leg up on Winter, did it not? Weiss made a pleased noise. Things were looking up. If it makes you feel any better, that's the last time I'll be hosting combat class for a while. Naruto made conversation between bites. I'm sure Glinda's learned her lesson by now. Good food can kill as much as it can heal, you know. After all, there's only so much stimulation the human body can take. That's why we make sample sizes. If I put my best into a single dish, well, let's call it an out-of-this-world experience. You saw what a good sample did to Goodwitch. You mean Goodwitch? He tittered. I know what I said. His words drew a tiny smile from her. You're incorrigible. Nope. That silly little smile had her heart kicking against her chest all over. Just a chef. Now say She closed her eyes to hide her flush and complied. At that very moment the door clicked open. Sir, Winter slipped in with nary a sound. I had a question about a recipe. Winter saw them, locked eyes with her. Weiss scowled. It was war. Cold water splashed onto her face. Emerald woke with a start and a yelp alike. Heart hammering, ears ringing, her first instinct was to rise to stand, to try and make sense of her surroundings. Something, anything. What the hell? That was made somewhat difficult by the blindfold and the chains shackling her to a metal chair. Panic bleated in her heart and she thrashed upright. Tried to break her restraints, grimaced as those iron links bit deep into her arms and thighs. She didn't have even the slightest wiggle room. Indeed, struggling only seemed to make her bonds constrict. Her captor was thorough if nothing else. By blindfolding her they not only prevented her from using her semblance, but they'd clearly thought ahead by shackling her to the floor. But how had she gotten here? The last thing she remembered was cornering Cinder at that strange house. A wild look in her mentor's eyes as she asked her something her frazzled mind couldn't recall what, and then pain. Had she been ambushed, taken by surprise, knocked out? Someone must have struck her when she wasn't looking. It was the only thing that made a lick of sense. Where was Cinder? Was she all right? And why was it so damnably quiet she couldn't hear a thing? No, wait, she told a lie. A faint chime echoed somewhere behind her. Emerald strained her ears, desperate to glean what little she could. She heard heels click across the floor, slowly, purposefully drawing closer. The dull rasp of steel, like a weapon being drawn. Emerald's heart leaped into her throat. Was she going to die here? Panic warped into terror. No. Surely her kidnappers wouldn't go to such lengths only to kill her, would they? Oh gods, she was going to die. A hand touched her shoulder. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Wait, she knew that voice. Ma'am, is that you? Without warning, the blindfold was torn away. With it came not light, but absence of it. The room was dark and small, lit by a single stubby candle mounted on a table so worn as to be little more than dead wax. A dying flame cast monstrous shadows against the walls and ceiling. She couldn't see a thing beyond them. Didn't do wonders for her confidence, that. But she could see the woman standing before her. Cinder. Her mistress stepped forth, right arm noticeably concealed behind her back. Eyes of molten gold gazed down at her, judging her. She felt unworthy before such power. You always were persistent, dear Emerald, her master finally spoke after a moment's pause. Too persistent. He'll be so angry with me. He too don't understand. Emerald strained against her restraints with an anguished noise. What's going on? What did I do? Worry not. A hand cupped her cheek. She leaned into it. All will be made clear once I convert you. Convert. Cinder's hidden arm came into view, bearing a single plate. Atop it lay a single chocolate cupcake, topped with white frosting. It smelled, well, delicious, frankly. Sweet, while not being too cloying. As though it had just been made. She felt her mouth water just looking at it. She'd not eaten anything since breakfast. Eat this, or die. Cinder's smile was death incarnate. That is the choice before you. Not much of a choice. One bite. That was all it took. And then NeonZangetsu was lost. Did I do good? Naruto slapped his forehead, slapped it so hard he gave himself a headache. Cinder, why? Patience, an eye for detail, and a strong sense of smell. These three things were essential for any true chef. Well, at least in theory. In truth, one needed a dash of madness, a pinch of joy, and just a dusting of love to truly make a divine dish. Naruto these fundamental truths better than most. Hell, he'd been the one to put the theory into practice. He had wrote the book, broke the mold, tipped the scales, all that jazz. He'd crafted dishes to make a man's knees weak and women swoon, creations that kept immortals themselves at bay. After all, when one cooked with chakra, one had to be careful not to burn oneself. He'd seen and done it all. Few things could truly surprise him anymore. Which made the sight before him something of an anomaly. Cinder. Yes. Why is there a girl tied up in my kitchen? Cinder somehow managed to look both sheepish and smug in the same instant. Smug because she apparently had a captive. Sheepish because she was still wearing that risque-made uniform of hers. He wasn't quite sure how she pulled that expression off even as she stepped aside, revealing her victim, one NeonZangetsu, gagged and bound to a chair. She was following me, so I took her captive. She's a spy. How stupid did she think he was? Cinder, that's one of your minions. And what if she is? Blasted girl was going to make him ask. And you fed her some of my food, didn't you? She flinched, making him think of a child with their hand caught in the cookie jar. No, I didn't. He pinched the bridge of his nose to stifle a sigh. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. A blonde brow quirked. One more lie and you lose your food privileges for a week. She whimpered like a kicked puppy. It was strangely at odds coming from a grown woman. All right, she's mine. And did you already feed her something I made? Yes. She hung her head before him. Then why the charade? Her face flamed. Can't you let me preserve some small scrap of my dignity? Considering you wanted to kill me beforehand, no. He smirked her way. No, I cannot. Fine, have it your own way. She gave a growl and yanked the gag out Emerald's mouth. Kill her, then. Emerald made startled emerald noises. In the end, Naruto found he couldn't help but take pity on the poor thing. Sorry about that. He stepped to the poor girl and patted her head. Are you going to behave? The illusionist nodded fervently as he untied her. I'll be good. Great. He clapped his hands. Now then, since you're new to our little group, I'll cut you some slack. If you misbehave, you won't be punished. Huh. Cinder will. The aspiring maiden glared golden daggers at her minion. You needn't worry about that. Emerald will be on her best behavior, won't you? Why yes, ma'am. Her minion yelped and babbled an affirmative. Of course. Food was love, food was life, and he made some demented dishes. Now that she'd had a taste of his culinary creations, she probably didn't want to let them go anytime soon. Nevertheless, he saw the question in her eyes long before she spoke it. But what about Salem? She had a plan, the vital festival. What about her? He fired an inquiry of his own right back. She won't do a thing now. She doesn't dare. Emerald climbed to her feet, idly rubbing her wrists. You sound so certain. Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? Her daughters are here. Cinder recoiled with a startled hiss. Those three? Yup. Who did you think their mother was? Cinder opened her mouth to retort. Go ahead, say something clever. See what happens. Her jaw snapped shut. Good girls. Now, I've got a school of hungry students to feed. Do try not to burn the place down while I'm away. Mercury leaned back from the window, retreating 3 steps at a time. Madness. Absolute madness. The hell did I just see? Naruto looked up and saw him. Smiled. No. Then the blonde bastard waved his way. Mercury gulped and all but bolted. Nope, not dealing with that. Beacon's cafeteria was curiously energetic these days. In truth, it baffled Winter. Having grown up in Atlas, she'd grown rather accustomed to rigid conformity, to countless students and soldiers following commands and moving as one entity. Her home life hadn't been much better in that regard. Before his untimely poisoning, Jack had wanted her to be nothing more than a worker bee, someone growing up in his image, following orders like a good little drone. There was none of that here. Everywhere she looked, she saw so many colors, clashing personalities, and teams alike. It never would have worked in Atlas, yet somehow it did in Vale. All because of one chef. Naruto was a blur of movement in the kitchen, his clones more so, each cooking up a dish even more convoluted than the last. They were a fine-tuned machine, moving in concert, barking out orders to some and questions to others. She glimpsed steak and salmon, poultry, vegetables she didn't have names for, and other exotic ingredients whose names made her head spin. 2 of his clones were even cooking up a cake over there for some reason or another. For a student's birthday, perhaps. Just watching it made her head spin. She couldn't imagine being thrown into that mosh pit. How did Weiss handle tea? Then a burst of scarlet petals slammed through the door and all but crashed into the counter. Familiar silver eyes beamed up at them, framed by a giddy grin. I've come for cookies. Naruto exhaled the long-suffering sigh of a doomed man. Winter, she tiled her head at him. Sir. Naruto turned a baffled look on her. Am I losing my touch? How can someone eat only cookies? A curious question given the circumstances. Weiss seemed oddly fond of this girl almost as much as Naruto. Too bad. He was her chef first, cooking for her since she was small. Now that she'd finally found him again after all these years, Winter had no intention of letting go. If her little sister wanted him to be her chef, then she'd have to fight for him. Ruby smacked her hands on the counter. Cookies now, please. Naruto frowned. Ruby, I'm a chef, not a baker. I can hardly keep in giving you. She clasped both hands before her face and held them up, silver eyes shining. Please. Fine, fine. He relented to something Ruby had said. I'll make you a batch. Yes, the rowdy Red Reaper pumped a fist into the air. But this is the last time he flicked her forehead with a finger. You need to eat more than these if you want to grow up big and strong. She kicked at the floor, looking like a sad kitten. You mean I can't have them anymore? You can still eat cookies, just not only them. Understand? Her eyes lit up again. MK, great. Winter, be a dear and help me with this. You've stood there long enough. She balked, only for him to fling a white apron at her. I'm not prepared, my heart isn't ready. Then make it ready. Naruto took her by the wrist and guided her behind the counter. Jacket off, it's going to get hot back here. You still remember how to bake, right? Yes. Isn't Weiss supposed to? Today's her day off. Ruby chirruped. You're here, so now you're it. Make with the cookies. And what, pray tell? Winter quirked a brow her way. Exactly is she doing in her free time? Ruby. Weiss' teammate plonked down into a seat. Something about killing a bunch of Grimm in the Emerald Forest and mastering her semblance. I think she mentioned a night. Realization broke like the dawn as she slid out of her jacket. So that was her aim. She intends to fight me, then I look forward to her efforts. Hey, Naruto bumped her hip with his as he marched to the ovens. Less talk, more making food. Winter's squeak of surprise was almost girlish. Ruby giggled. Report, Mercury. Mercury knelt and regarded the seer before him. Ghastly things. He hated using them. Well, I don't know how to say this, boss, but I'm pretty sure Cinder and Emerald have gone crazy. Have they now? Salem sounded almost amused by his plight. Crazy witch. I had thought they were made of sterner stuff than that. Still, suppose that's what they get for sticking their noses where they don't belong. Had I known he'd taken up residence in Vale, I would have warned them away. It matters not. The plan will continue. There's something else. Oh, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Since when do you have kids in Vale? The stillness that followed proved suffocating. And then, I will tan his hide. Shadows struck in the night, clanged. They were not particularly quiet shadows. Damn it, Dove Carden cursed quietly. Keep it down, will ya? Sorry, came the fervent whispered hiss. I can't see a damn thing. Idiots, his team, the lot of them. They didn't have their weapons handy, but they didn't need those to cause some havoc. To make that shitty chef pay. Throw them out the cafeteria, would he? They'd nearly been packed out. Beacon entirely. He was tired of eating canned meals. This was payback. This was retribution. This was revenge. They'd start with the ovens. Smash those. Leave his ingredients out. Maybe break a few plates and bend all the cutlery, or perhaps. Wait, what is that? He spied a flash of color, brown and white, a tray of donuts left on the counter. Someone left these out. He picked it up and popped it in his mouth. Well, don't mind if I do. Dove, Sky, and Lark each snatched one for themselves and went about their business. Sabotage was hungry work after all. They began with the plates, smashing them on the floor. From there they went to work with the utensils, bending and breaking them. Next came the fridge that was locked, but Lark had brought his lockpicks. That left the rest of them to sabotage the ovens. Break a gas valve here, crank up the heat there, and the chef would have a nasty surprise tomorrow. Strange, though. Harden kept finding trays of donuts scattered about. Well, more faux rim. Wow. Harden had only just swallowed his third donut when a low voice intoned behind him. I thought you lot might try something, but I didn't think you were this stupid. His body locked up. MMPH. Harden stumbled, tried to catch himself on a table, but his arms wouldn't work. His very body locked up. The world went sideways as he banged his head on the counter and flopped face first onto the floor. A boot nudged them, forcibly turning them over. Cold blue eyes blazed down at them. As a chef, I have a rule these days. Don't poison anyone. But for you I'm willing to make an exception. Now what will it be? Will you die here or will you tell me what I want to know? He tried to speak, but even his jaw betrayed him, left dead and numb in his mouth. MMRGL. I've prepared a lot of dishes in my day. A knife hooked under his left eye. But I've never chopped a man up and baked him into a pie. Would you like to be a pie? Carden, your eyeballs might make a fine bit of spice for a salad. It was too much. His eyes rolled back into his head. As such, he never heard his tormentor laugh above him. Naruto chortled softly. Works every time. Now, I won't cook you, but I'm not above tar and feathers. Come the next morning, the entire academy was laughing at Team CRDL. Weiss was one of the first to see the fate that had befallen them. As she came early to the kitchen for her cooking lessons, even she winced a little when she beheld Carden and his flunkies. Poor bastards. They'd stepped in it all right, boot and ankle all. Their muffled cries would haunt her for some time. She wouldn't wish that on her worst enemy. Naruto had certainly outdone himself this time. In a fit of inspiration he hadn't had them flogged or even deigned to kill them outright. Both would have been merciful. Instead, he tarred and feathered the 4 fools from head to toe, gagged them, then shackled them on the walls for good measure. Lower, too, which meant all the students could get at them. It was certainly a memorable punishment if nothing else. No doubt it would be the talk of Beacon for some time to come. Team CFVY was already taking pictures of the fearsome foursome, Weiss noted with some small amusement. Well, Coco was taking pictures. Velvet was busy giving Cardin a few hard kicks in a rather choice place. Should she feel pity? Probably. She didn't. Reluctantly, she said as much when she joined him by the ovens. Wasn't that a bit excessive? Nope. Naruto cracked an egg on a frying pan, set it to simmer with some sauce and a bit of bacon besides, then swept past. They broke into my kitchen. I broke their everything, including their pride. Quick as a flash, one of his clones had the snack well in hand, catering to a 4th-year student. Turnabout is fair play, my dear student. And you're just going to leave them there, probably for the rest of the day. Naruto, Weiss, her mentor sang back. Now put on your apron and get over here, we've got work to do and not much time in which to do it. What followed was an absolute cacophony of cooking. Hungry students arrived in droves, eager for breakfast. Orders came hot and heavy, one after the other, until it was all she could do to keep up. Her mind blurred, her hands moved of their own accord, all under Naruto's watchful eye. She nearly panicked at that, terrified of making a mistake that would otherwise embarrass her or him. So many dishes, and yet despite all that cooking for others proved strangely fulfilling. To see the smiles on the faces of her fellow students, hear their thanks and know that she had done this, she had made this, with her own 2 hands. It felt good, really good. By the end of it she was tired and sweaty and sore, but also strangely fulfilled. Feels good, doesn't it? Yes, she relented, slumping into a nearby chair. There, I said it. Happy now. Naruto walked right past her, pausing only to ruffle her hair as he prepared another meal. Indubitably, Weiss made weary Weiss noises. Bastard. If she wasn't so tired she'd stab him with a spoon. Her manifest displeasure radiated out at his back and he kept right on working. No, wait, she told a lie. Just as she opened her mouth to denounce him, he flicked a chocolate donut her way. Hunger, she'd not had breakfast yet, seized the wheel and she caught it as a shark might, that is to say, with her teeth and nothing else. His laughter wasn't lost on her. How terribly unladylike. Still, she was too hungry to protest and wolfed it down. Don't do that again. Another one hit her mouth like a shuriken, muffling her protests. She ruthlessly chewed it down and glared his way if only to hide her smile. Cooking for her classmates wasn't all like the semblance training she'd done down in the Emerald Forest. She'd done that in anger, trying to prepare for her impending fight with Winter. And she had, for the most part. But this was something she'd done with her own 2 hands. She had done this. Let no one say why Schnee was unwilling to learn new skills. She'd sworn to surpass her sister someday, one way or another. Maybe, just maybe, this might be one way of doing it. Across the cafeteria, a door burst open, shattering her thoughts. It was her only warning. WEIIISSS. Well, maybe the shout was also a warning because a crimson blur burst through said door, vaulted over the counter, and struck her like a meteorite. Weiss went down as did her chair with a squawk. Ruby all but rode her down to the floor, practically planting herself in her lap. Pale hands took hands of her shoulders and silver eyes filled her vision. Her pale face flamed pink. Close, too close. Her captor leaned in, "Yes," and shook her like a rag doll. Ruby rose. "Unhand me this instant." There was no such unhanding. On the contrary, Ruby nuzzled her cheek against hers and held tight. "Don't you ever run off on me like that ever again." Run where? Weiss whirled as she struggled to speak. "Stop shaking me, Ruby." Ruby did, if only to glare silver daggers at her. "We woke up and you weren't there. We thought you ran away after your argument with Blake." Oh, she'd forgotten all about that. Things had gotten rather dusty between the 2 of them last night over the recent string of dust robberies. Some harsh words had been said, but in the end she'd remembered Naruto's words and cooler heads had prevailed. Or so she'd thought at the time. Evidently not, judging by Ruby's stricken expression. She looked like she was all of 3 seconds from bursting into tears. Something clenched in her chest at the sight. "Blake and I are fine," she flailed at the smaller girl to no avail. "I told you I had lessons this morning, remember." Judging by her no vacant expression, the little reaper did not. "You did." Yes, she should have known. Team RWBY never got up early if they could help it. In her panic, Ruby must have assumed she'd fled. It also begged the question of where in blazes Blake and Young had wandered off to, but she felt that was a question she didn't want the answer to. Besides, Ruby was looking millish and not terribly keen on moving, which meant she wasn't going to be getting up anytime soon, not until her leader calmed down. She sighed and patted the younger girl's head. It seemed to calm her, if only just. "So you're not running away?" "No." Weiss heaved an irritated sigh. "You're not going to try and hunt down the White Fang?" "I will not." "You're not going to get caught in a running brawl with Torchwick on the docks?" "Why would I even?" "I dunno, it just feels like that should have happened by now." A scroll clicked somewhere above them. "Alwa, look at you two. Aren't you just adorable?" Weiss bridled and looked, assuming it was Naruto. "Delete that at once." "Fat chance of that," Weiss screamed. Weiss swore softly and craned her neck backwards, then up. Oh dear, she knew that voice all too well. It was not, in fact, Naruto. She spied him across the kitchen talking to Blake, who must have snuck in while Ruby was fussing over her. As she looked on, he pressed a pristine plate bearing a tuna melt sandwich into her hands. Her teammate, with whom she'd exchanged such angry words only the night before, bowed deeply, mouthed her thanks and retreated to a nearby table to savor her meal. She seemed content to ignore the lot of them. Such a cat. Which meant, sure enough, when Weiss looked up, young Xialong grinned down at her, lilac eyes sparkling with wicked triumph, phone in hand. So you've helped make our breakfast this morning, huh? Not bad, Weiss cream. The blonde brawler planted a fist on her hip. Maybe you ought to take up cooking if the whole huntress thing doesn't work out. Her brow furrowed. Xialong, I will end you. Not with Ruby all over you, it won't. Her right eye twitched. Ruby. She perked up. Weiss, off. Ruby looked down and finally realized exactly where she was sitting, right in her lap, and what position they were in. More importantly, what it looked like. All the blood rushed to her face. Indeed, her visage went redder than her namesake. She bolted to her feet in a shower of red roses. The moment she did, Weiss surged upright and grabbed the first thing in arm's reach. In hindsight, she could have chosen better. She scrambled to her feet, snatched up a soup ladle and banished it like Mirtenester in Young's face. A blonde brow arched. Seriously, one more word about Ruby and me, and I'll tell Naruto to revoke your food privileges. Young twitched, ever so slightly, but it was there. You wouldn't dare. No, she swatted her on the nose with the ladle. Try me. You can't cut me off, you don't have the authority. Weiss swatted her apron. I've got it right here. Shit. Ruby's sister was known for being as bold as she was brash and brave. She didn't back down, even in the face of being denied her strawberry sunrise. Not right away. Uncertainty crept in. Naruto's cuisine was absolutely to die for, literally in some cases, and the idea of being cut off pained her. She could see it behind those violet eyes. Still, she stared. Weiss lifted her chin and stared right back, refusing to be cowed. In the end, one yielded to the other. It was inevitable. Weiss, yes, Young. You're one scary bitch. She preened and lowered her ladle. So I've been told. Ruby thumped her sister on the back. That's another one, swear jar. Aw, come on, I didn't mean to. Swear jar. Lake coughed behind them at her table. Weiss caught the ghost of a smile lingering on her lips as she polished off the last of her sandwich. Said smile died an ugly death when she caught her staring her way. Ugh, that was a bridge she'd have to cross sooner or later. If only she knew how. Now, Naruto pushed himself between Young and Ruby with an indulgent smile. As entertaining as this is, you're going to be late for class if you keep this up. He seemed awfully eager to be rid of them. Weiss glowered pale daggers at him for it. Something you wish to share with us, sir? No. He waved a hand before his face, never breaking eye contact. Not at all have fun. There was something in his voice just then, the absolute fiend, and it was nothing God. What are you up to this time? Not a thing. Her mentor turned away, dusting his hands off on his apron. Now if you'll excuse me, we need to get ready for the lunch rush. Naruto didn't look at her. A slip of the tongue, nothing more. You're not going to blow up the kitchen, are you? A soft laugh. Perished the thought. And girls, the entirety of Team RWBY paused. Grinning, the chef of Beacon jerked a thumb over his shoulders toward the still prone Team CRDL. You forgot to take your pictures. Get him while you can before class. Scrolls came out and clicked away. Weiss hesitated. I don't know, this feels awfully childish. And did I mention they wanted to poison your food? Weiss brandished her soup ladle with intent. Hardin whimpered behind his gag. She stared at the mirror. Her reflection stared back, nonplussed. All right, then. No point in mucking about here. Time to face that fool of a cook. She'd show him what for. Thanks again for joining us today, Winter. Thus she frowned as she tugged on her apron. I wasn't aware we'd be sharing the kitchen with a third party. Naruto tutted softly and ruffled her hair between laying out plates. They'll be here soon enough. Must you keep doing that? I'm not a child. A muffled groan answered her. Odd. It hadn't come from him. So where? Winter craned her neck and tilted her head toward the source. Tilted it some more now. Just a little more for good measure, to be absolutely certain her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. Alas, the scene before her did not change. Team CRDL remained where they were, tarred and feathered, shackled to the wall, now with more than few black eyes and bruises besides. Good. It meant she wasn't losing her mind. On the other hand, is there a particular reason those boys are battered and bruised like that? There may be. Naruto strode past her, idly tossing a skin of dough in one hand while carrying a bottle of sherry in the other. It's quite the story. Even as he spoke, he passed the ladder off to a clone, finished preparing the pizza in his hands, whipped it into an oven and moved on to a fine cut of steak. Weiss has a temper. Winter winced. She certainly does. They also tried to poison her team's food, suo. Kitchen knives came out, lifted by a swarm of glyphs. Team CRDL whimpered impotently at the sight. Naruto tutted softly and shook his head. Winter, no. You can't kill them. We don't do that here, remember. Winter vaulted the counter, shedding her apron as she went. I don't want to kill them, I just want to cause a little pain. No little hands rested her backward, she could reach them. No stabbing is bad. Winder looked down. Naruto chuckled. You heard her. Belatedly she looked, recognized little Melusine hanging off her elbow. Apparently she'd elected to join them today. The girl looked absolutely adorable dangling from her arm. Her pout, even more so. No sign of her sisters, though. She shuddered to think what Barghest and Bayob and Sith were up to, given their absence. Nothing good most likely. Something involving shoes or boys, probably. Honestly, whomever their mother was, she'd let those two become absolute hellions. Still, this one at least was pure. Fine. She lowered her arm with a sigh. I won't stab them. Good. Winter let herself be led back into the kitchen by the hand, grumbling under her breath for every step. She could always grill those fools later. It wouldn't be quite so sweet, but it would suffice. She forced herself to look on the bright side, for a silver lining, as it were. Obstacles or no, they were relatively alone. She'd take what she could get. This was her chance, this was her moment. Opportunity knocked. While Weiss was busy with class and the lunch rush some hours away, she could speak freely. Surely little Melusine wouldn't mind. She let go of her hand and seemed content enough to help Naruto's clones prepare another meal, which left the opening gambit to her. There was just one teeny problem. She didn't know what to say. Winter's mind flailed frantically, seeking a conversation topic and finding none. At last, one came to her. Wasn't there that dance coming up? Of course, they weren't strictly students and couldn't attend as such, but the headmaster had been asking after chaperoness. She congratulated herself for her prudent thinking. That would do nicely. Sir, I wanted to ask you something. Naruto looked up, hands stained with flour. All the words clogged in her throat. There is, that is to say, would you like to? The doors slammed open and ripped themselves from their hinges, putting paid to that thought. Naruto Uzumaki, a furious voice boomed behind him, full of wrath. Cease your cooking and hearken to me at once. I would have words with you. Naruto looked away from his preparations and cocked his head. Pivoted now, swore softly for good measure. Winter joined him not a heartbeat later, for a stranger stood before them. Not a girl, but a woman. Initially, Winter couldn't tell if their face had been scarred by those pulsing red veins in her visage or if she really was just that pale beneath all that heavy concealer. Was she trying to hide something in her eyes? How red they were, the very sclera a dark, ominous black like so much tar. That ominous gaze contrasted wickedly with her long, nearly to her waist ebony black hair, the color of which seemed strangely off somehow. Had it been dyed, maybe a wig of some sort? No, it looked too natural for that. Speaking of natural, to be fair, this mysterious newcomer was wearing a beacon uniform, but several sizes too small for someone of her stature. Winter could see things she clearly wasn't meant to see. The indecency of it all sent fresh heat racing up the back of her neck. A scrap of white lace here, the hint of a brassiere beneath buttons stretched to their absolute limit. And yet despite her appearance she exuded such a sense of sheer presence that Winter found herself momentarily cowed. The stranger in question stabbed a finger Naruto's way. It wasn't even directed at her and Winter still found herself wincing. Don't move. The blonde in question touched a finger to his chest as though to say, who, me, the very picture of innocence. It only incensed the stranger further. She stalked forward, hips swaying, eyes blazing, heels clicking against the floor as her voice dropped to a menacing contralto. Why she all but hissed the word now as a finely manicured finger stabbed at his forehead, threatening to drill into the gray matter beneath. You've some nerve thwarting my plans. Thwarting your plans? Naruto finally found his voice, and well that he did, because Winter was stricken speechless by the sheer menace of this woman. She glared. Aren't you? Maybe. You come here after all these years, the woman snarled, baring pearly white teeth at him. Bring my children into this place, and make me come down here to retrieve them myself. Well, what do you have to say for yourself? They came of their own accord. Poor choice of words. And yet, his eyes narrowed. An ember of realization gleamed in them. You actually dyed your hair, didn't you? Salem, that has to be the most outlandish disguise I've ever seen. Melusine saw right through it as only a child could. Mother, Winter most assuredly did not. Who, and who or what was a Salem?